Good morning. The hearing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Wednesday, July 11th, 2018. The time is 9:00 a.m. and we are meeting in the hearing board room in Diamond Bar. Today we have one matter on the calendar. It is Carpenter Company, case number 5356-2 for an interim variance. And who is representing the Carpenter Company today? And if you don't mind turning on your microphone and speaking directly into it.
Okay. I am representing Carpenter Company.
And can you state your name and spell it for the record and state your title?
Yes, Stephanie Stolzenberg. That is spelled Stepphanie Stolzenberg, Stolzenberg. And I am the Assistant Corporate Environmental Manager for Carpenter Company.
Thank you, Ms. Stolzberg. And who is representing the Executive Officer today?
Mary Reichert on behalf of the Executive Officer.
Thank you, Ms. Reichert. Okay, let me start. Ms. Stolzenberg, have you been before the hearing board before?
I have not.
This is your first time.
I have not.
Okay, so today you are here requesting an interim variance. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the proceedings will go, and we can help to prompt you along as you go.
Okay.
The first thing we're going to do is when someone asks for either an interim, an emergency type of variance, and there is no notice to the public, we need to bifurcate the hearing and have first a hearing to decide whether we can actually proceed with the substantive hearing. So we're going to need to determine whether there's good cause to do that. And I don't know if you've looked up what our guidelines are. If not, I can kind of tell you generally what they are.
Not for good cause.
Okay, so for an interim variance, there are a few things you will need to demonstrate, and we're going to try to confine the first part of the hearing just to these factors. The first one is that you are already in violation, or that the violation of some rule or regulation or part of your permit is imminent. The second thing you'll have to discuss or give evidence of is that the circumstances that were leading to that violation could not reasonably have been avoided by your company. The other one is that you exercise diligence in coming before this board as soon as you knew or should have known that you were in violation or would be in violation, and that you need to quantify for us or tell us how a denial of a variance today or a variance hearing would, and having to wait until I think you have your regular variance hearing in August, on August 22nd, how the time frame between now and August 22nd, waiting until there was a noticed hearing, how that would be of detriment to your company. And so what we're going to do is for both part of the hearings, we'll come to you, and if you have a short statement you'd like to make, just a short, brief statement of your case. We'll start with that. We'll go to the executive officer for their position as well, to the district prosecutor. And then you can present your witnesses. And I assume, are you going to also be testifying today as a witness?
I'm not sure what that means when you say witness.
So if you are going to be presenting any evidence you'd like for us, so your testimony, we should take it as evidence for your side, then you should be sworn and under oath.
Then yes, I will be.
Okay, so even your opening statement, if you'd like to become evidence, I'll swear you in first, and anyone else who you've brought to testify.
Yes, I think we both should be, myself and Dan Hauersile, as well as he will be, if asked to or needs to, presenting some evidence on economic impacts based on were we required to shut that line down and keep it closed until a regular variance hearing.
Okay, and we keep a recording of all the proceedings, so to keep it cleaner, we're going to stick with one witness at a time. And if you're asked questions that you cannot answer and you'd rather defer it to your other witness, then just state that for the record, and at the appropriate time, we'll go to your other witness.
Okay.
Okay, and so once we're done, you're done presenting each witness, then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Reichert. She might ask you some questions, and the board may have questions for you as well for each of your witnesses. And then when we're done, we'll just do a closing statements, and the board will deliberate and make a decision today.
Okay.
Okay. So then let's proceed. The first thing I'm going to ask is anyone who is going to testify or may testify today to please stand to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Ms. Stolzenberg, if you have a brief opening statement, and again, we're going to start with just those good cause on why it is there was such an urgency that you could not give proper notice to the public for a hearing today.
Okay, we knew that by July 1st, our fiberline oven burners were required to have a source test, a compliance source test, and we needed to demonstrate compliance by July 1st of this year, which is the year that the burners turn 15 years old. That is the rule requirement. We had the test scheduled. Unfortunately, there was a delay with the first test. We had to postpone it. That was scheduled for May 24th. It had to be rescheduled to June 9th, I believe. At that time, the burners failed the source test. We immediately started working on someone to come and tune the burners, thinking that would resolve the problem. It did not. We had both the gas company out and then a combustion expert out to tune the burners, thinking that would solve the problem. We immediately source tested again a second time after we had the burners tuned on Saturday, June 30th. That was the soonest we could get someone to come out to service the burners. The second source test failed. Okay, we immediately contacted AQMD, started looking into what our options were, and subsequently filed a petition to have these variance hearings, the interim variance one today and one on August 22nd for the regular variance hearing. We only run that fiber line. We have 2 fiber lines, and we only run that fiber line when we need to run it for certain products that we manufacture for a certain customer. The economic impact of not running that line until almost the end of August would be that customer, which is Sealy Beds in Moreno Valley, would have to shut down their operation as well. So not only that, but we would probably have to lay off our employees that work on that line. So it could lead to an employee layoff of 6 or 7 people, as well as shutting our customer completely down because we're their only provider of the products that they use.
Thank you. Ms. Reichert, do you have questions?
Well,
I'm so sorry. Please start with your opening.
that's okay. The district does have some questions concerning the timeline and the timeliness of filing the petition as well as scheduling the initial source test. So the district is going to withhold its position on good cause until the completion of that portion of the hearing.
Thank you. And I should ask, Ms. Stolzenberg, would you like to add to your initial opening statement before we ask you questions? Are there other facts you would like the board to know? And I'm sure we'll ask those questions. But
Okay,
please,
I don't believe so, except to say that I guess our company president had asked the question, well, why didn't you start the source test process sooner so you would have had more time? Because we never expected them to fail, okay? We had no reason to. We expected them to pass. Their manufactured specifications say that they are low NOx burners that will operate at 25 parts per million NOx or less, so we never expected them to fail. And our other Fiberline 1, which has the exact same burners, was source tested in 2014 per the same rule requirement, and they passed. So we had no way of anticipating that this would happen.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? What was tested in 2014?
We have 2 fiber lines. Both are permitted through AQMD. They do virtually the same thing. We have 2 operations. Sometimes we run one, sometimes we run the other, depending on what products we're manufacturing. Line 1 was built years before Fiberline 2, and so those burners turned 15 years old in 2014. We source tested those burners. They are the exact same low NOx burners that are in the other oven. Those burners passed the compliance source test, so we had no way of anticipating that these would not pass.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Reichert, do you have questions?
Thank you. Thank you for that additional information. That's very helpful. Can you give me a little more detail? Is there the same number of burners in line 1 as line 2?
No. Line 1 has 3 1.6 million BTU burners. Line 2 has 4.
And is line 1 run at the same temperature as line 2?
I think I'm going to have to defer that
That's fine,
to him.
that's fine. And when was the test due for line 1, and when did you schedule the test for those burners?
The test was due by July 1st, okay, had to be completed by July 1st. We started working on scheduling it back in March or April. The source tester is extremely busy, and the first opening that he had was, I believe, May 24th. He did come out that day. We were going to do the test on that day. There was some problems staging the equipment. We couldn't get his source testing equipment close enough to where they needed to be to run the line to test the stack, so we had to cancel it that day and reschedule it. The soonest next available date he had was June 9th, which was a Saturday. We brought him in at time and a half charges to have that done on that Saturday. That was the first time the burners failed.
And that was line 2?
That was line 2.
So for line 1, I was just trying to establish the pattern of how
see.
you typically
I see.
schedule these. Yeah, so for line 1, when did you schedule that one?
You know, to be honest with you, I don't recall because it's been 4 years now, but I'm sure we started working on it months ahead, and I think we probably had the source test done well before the due date.
And is that, so based on your experience, it sounds like you only have these 2 lines, or your conversations with the source tester, is that type of timeline when you have something due July 1st, is that a typical timeline to start talking to them in March or April in anticipation of that?
Yes, I believe it is, because it's not a difficult test to do. It doesn't take a long time to do, and we had no problems, you know, with the initial one. I think we started well within a time frame that was adequate to get it done and completed before it was due.
Okay. And then I just want to talk a little bit about what happened after that June 9th test. So on June 9th, the burners failed the test, and you were aware of that on June 9th?
I was.
Okay. And then please describe what you did after June 9th.
Okay, that was a Saturday. I immediately got in touch. I believe he was there that day. The maintenance manager was there. I spoke with him because he and I work very closely together whenever I have a problem with equipment, and he's very well aware of, you know, our requirements for all of our permits and what have you. So I discussed it with him. His name is Jose Ruvalcaba. He's the maintenance manager at Carpenter Company, Riverside. And he suggested that I get someone out to tune the burners, okay? He works with combustion equipment a lot, and he said that's probably your best shot. So he said, in the meantime, depending on how soon you can get someone here, why don't we try the gas company? I know that they will do it for free. So immediately, Monday morning, first thing, I got in touch with the gas company. I arranged to have someone come out. That person came out on Tuesday morning, first thing Tuesday morning, which was the 11th or 12th. He tried to work on it. I told him what the problem was, that it had failed the source test. He tried to tune the equipment, doing what he did. I didn't watch him work, but he did what he could. He was there for a couple of hours, came back and said, I can't get it to tune to any lower than 50, I think he said 52 parts per million NOx is what I'm getting. Now, I don't know what kind of equipment he had, mobile equipment, testing equipment, I don't know. But that's what he told me. So we knew that wasn't going to work, and we weren't where we needed to be. So then I started getting in, I contacted someone recommended by Ken Kumar, who was the source tester himself. That company was called Western Combustion. They had nothing available to even get out there and try to tune those burners until like mid-July, and I couldn't do that, so I looked for somebody else. I found somebody else Ken Kumar recommended, and that company's name is Heat Tech, and they were able to come out on a Saturday for me. They said they would do it, and they did, and they mobilized, and they coordinated with Ken Kumar, who's the source tester. We had them back out. The soonest they could get out was June 30th. So they came out on June 30th, along with the source tester. They worked for a couple of hours trying to tune the burners. I shouldn't say they, it was one person, one technician. He came out, and he tried to do whatever he could, and we were going to do a second source test. He tuned them as best he could, and they started the source test, and they couldn't get to where they needed to be. They said they could not get it down to any lower than 45 parts per million NOx. And so we abandoned the test. They said, there's no way these burners are gonna, there's no way it's gonna pass. So you guys probably just need to replace the burners. So at that point in time, that's where what we started discussing, was replacing those burners. Things have changed a little bit since that time. We have learned that perhaps,
We can talk about that at the next stage. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to kind of get an idea of where you were at in that process, and that was great, thank you. Between June 9th and June 30th, did you believe that the tuning would likely solve this problem and bring you below the 30 parts per million?
I had no reason not to. Yeah, I did. I mean, because I didn't know what was wrong with them. I thought if they're not operating within the manufacturing specifications, why not? You know, this is what the specs say, so they should be operating at that. So I really had no reason not to believe that.
Is there a maintenance schedule for the burners? Do you have to do any?
No,
routine-
not a maintenance schedule that I'm aware of. There is regular PMs that are done on the equipment, but I don't think on the burners themselves. I think just on the oven, you know, like oiling the O-rings or this or that, but I don't think anything on the burners themselves that I'm aware of.
Can you just define the term PM? Is that preventive?
Preventive maintenance.
Thank you.
That's all the questions I have on the good cause aspect.
Thank you. Board members, any questions? Mr. Balagopalan.
Thank you. The temperature, what temperature does the oven operate at in the line? It's line 2, right?
That'll be him.
May he answer?
Wait, if you cannot answer, just.
I believe it's between 365 and 400 degrees Fahrenheit, but I'm not certain.
Okay. And then there are 4 burners, so there are 4 different zones in that oven?
I don't know. I don't know how closely or how far apart they are located to one another.
When was the permit issued for this line?
I want to say 2004. That's when the line was
Was there
built.
any testing done, or was there any permit requirement at that time to do any testing?
No.
Was it your understanding that burner was going to meet 30 ppm because of district BHCT requirements, or is that what the manufacturer?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Is it your understanding at the time that I think you mentioned your burner manufacturer specification said it'll meet 25 ppm. Is that to meet the AQMD requirement at that time, to meet the 30 ppm requirement for best available control technology?
I don't know. I don't know. I just know it's a Cyclomax low NOx burner. I have to assume that it was purchased for that reason.
Okay.
I do have the specs with me if you need to see them.
Okay. Thanks.
Ms. Bird, do you have a question?
I'm sorry. You said that this line was only for one customer. Is that correct?
No, we can use that line to manufacture everything we can manufacture on line 1, meaning we can use them interchangeably, but there's one product that we cannot run on the other line that we have to run on line 2.
Okay, so there's one product for one customer that cannot be run on line 1, that has to be on line 2.
Correct.
Okay. Has it ever happened before? You said you obtained this equipment or started in 2004 that you got a permit? Did I say?
I believe it is. The burners were manufactured in 2003, and to the best of my knowledge, I was not at the company at that time. To best of my knowledge, it started up in 2004.
And since that time, these burners have never been shut down, or have they?
Not that I'm aware of. Not in terms of source testing. Okay, I do believe there have been some maintenance items done on them. My maintenance manager mentioned something about replacing the burner sleeves at one point in time based on just needing to be replaced.
Do you know how long they were down then?
I do not.
Is there any other provider of the particular product that your one customer needs that's only produced by this line?
You mean another manufacturer aside from Carpenter? I'll have to defer that to my fiber manager.
And you also said that the lowest that they were able to get the burners was to 45 ppm? Is that
That's
correct?
what I was told.
Okay. And that was on the last test? Source
That was on June 30th.
Thank you.
Back on the initial, first of all, why on May 24th was it impossible to test specifically?
Because the tester has a mobile testing van that he uses, and it's quite tall, and we were manufacturing that day. Production had already started, and the location that he needed to get to access the ovens, okay, or the oven and the burners, was already being filled up with blocks of foam, and we had planned to open the garage door that would allow him to drive into this warehouse and park next to the fiber line. They were already running production, and so his truck couldn't even fit beneath the garage door. It was too tall to drive into, so we were gonna have to stage him at another area closer, which was like at the end of a pouring line conveyor that we were running, and we couldn't put him there because we were already producing product and the area was blocked. So we thought about driving through the plant, going around the other side, coming in a loading dock ramp, but the truck was too tall and could not fit underneath the door. So we had to abandon that day's testing and bring him in on a day when we weren't running anything on a Saturday to where we could get closer to the location and not have anything else be in the way.
And that was, the height of his van was not something you knew in advance?
I did not.
On June 9th, that was the first failed test on the Saturday, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
52 ppm seems to me considerably higher than 30 ppm. Why at that time was there not a thought, this could be a failure, very possibly? We should probably at the same time perhaps look for a variance at that time.
I didn't even know that was an option at the time.
Okay. So I see that the case number is -2. Do you know if are you aware of any other time where your company has been before the board seeking a variance?
I am not aware of anything, but I have been with the company since August of 2009. I am not aware of any other situations where they have come before the board.
Okay. And how did you learn about the variance, and when and how did you learn about that?
I'm trying to remember now. I don't exactly recall. I believe I called AQMD and somehow got referred to the clerk of the board. And I remember calling the clerk's office, and it was explained to me at that time what the process was and what I would have to do. And the person that I talked to, and I want to say her name was Rebecca, I don't recall, said, here's where you need to go look, this is what you need to go do, this is the process, and I started looking at the rules, and then I called back a few times and finally figured out how to fill out the paperwork, what paperwork I needed, what the fees were going to be, and so on.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a lot of equipment that is under jurisdiction of the AQMD, regulated by?
Yes, we do.
It seems that you were very well aware of the date, so understood. I had one other question. It's really related to the substance of what you're asking for, but for me, it's important because the noticing requirements for a short variance, for example, are significantly less, and you can get get before the board for a short variance a lot quicker than for a regular variance. And so I'm wondering when you realized, and we can get more into the specifics of why you think you need till January of 2019, I believe is what you're asking for. But when did you realize that you would need to replace equipment and it might take that long to do that?
I don't think it will take that long. The only reason I put those dates on the petition was in case I was thinking in my mind, okay, if we have to do a permit modification, let's say we need to replace the burner, so that's what we were planning to do at that time. Since then, we've learned that maybe we can perhaps reconfigure that oven and remove one of the burners or two of them, cutting down the capacity so that we run the burners at a higher rate, a higher firing rate, because then the NOx emissions would go down. That's what I'm told. But I put those dates through December 31st because I was thinking, in my experience, even when, and we've asked for several expedited permits in the past, permit modifications through our permit engineer, Stephen Jang. And I don't think I've ever received a permit before at least 3 months, even expedited. So I was thinking, okay, in my mind, okay, if it takes 3 months to get a permit modification, and it takes us a month or two to schedule the installation and get a source test to demonstrate compliance, it could take that amount of time.
Thank you. Board members, any other questions? Mr. Balagopalan.
Thank you. You mentioned that now you're looking at maybe modifying and removing 2 of the 4 burner?
Possibly. We met with a combustion expert yesterday, came out to talk to us, a gentleman from a company called Worth Gas Equipment, and he was explaining to us how those burners work, explaining to me and to our maintenance manager, Jose Ruvalcaba, and he said, you know, these burners are overrated for your operation. They are way too big for what you need, and the reason that you're not passing the NOx compliance source test is because you're only firing those burners at 20% of their capacity, and it's very inefficient for emissions. In that respect, NOx emissions are high because you're not if you were burning them if you were running that oven at 1,000 degrees instead of 365, they would pass every day of the week, but they're never going to pass with 4 burners in there. So possibly, he said, if we could reconfigure, remove 1 or 2 of the burners that exist now, that we could fire the other 2 burners at a higher rate, and we would probably pass the test. If we can't, if we try that and we can't, then we will just replace them with lower NOx burners, about half the capacity that we have now.
Did you have any discussion with the permit engineer about the requirement for a permit modification to do that?
I did not, because Stephen Jang is on vacation, as I understand it, in China until July 16th.
Okay. Because you would need a permit modification, so you have to factor that in the timeline before
I
you
fully
can-
expected that, yes.
Now, I think the first source test that failed was 52 ppm.
I don't know for
approximately.
certain. I have not been given any documentation on that, which I have requested from the source tester, because I told him we need something, and he said, well, it failed the test. I don't have any report. I said, well, I'm going to need something in writing to prove that we did it. So he is in the process of providing that to me. I do not have it, but that is what verbally was expressed to me at that time.
How about the second test? Did he give any kind of verbal number?
He said, I think he said 45 parts per million was the lowest they could get to on that second occasion.
And you have no idea how long the burner has been out of spec? I mean, how long they've been operating without meeting the 30 ppm limit?
I have no idea.
Thanks.
Ms. Byrd.
Do you have any other equipment other than these 2 lines that have the source test requirements?
Yes, we do. We have a boiler that has a source test requirement, which was done earlier this year. There was a requirement to test that at 5 years of age, which that was done, it passed. We also have an air pollution scrubber, our APS unit, that is permitted and does also have a source test requirement, and that source test requirement is tied to material throughput. So that source test is not due yet. We expect it to be due next year, but we'll have to wait and see how much material throughput we actually have before we know when it's required.
Do you have any idea when you scheduled? I'm assuming it would be yourself, so maybe you would know, when you would schedule the boiler, for instance, to have a source test done in order to meet the date that it needs to be.
I started scheduling that months in advance, and I had it done months before it was due, just because we'd never had one before, and I didn't know what would happen.
So when you say you scheduled months in advance, you scheduled and had it completed months in advance, or you just called to get a source test done months in advance?
I don't have the file with me, so I'm not certain how far in advance it was done.
Okay, I would like to know what the pattern has been, if that's possible, for when you schedule test?
Well, as, you know, as the environmental manager, I'm always looking at our permits, I'm always looking at the requirements and always thinking about well in advance of when things are coming. It is not like this was a surprise to me, this test that was coming. I'd had it marked in my file for years before it was done. But because the line 1 burners passed the sort, I didn't see any issue with the timing of scheduling it at the end of May.
And I guess what I'm saying as well is that you don't remember when you scheduled the line 1 burners either.
I don't. It's been 5 years.
Yeah, or if there's a record of when the testing was done for the line burners.
I could certainly get that information.
Okay. I'd like to know what the pattern has been.
Dr. Lerner?
Both sets of burners, 1 and 2, are being run simultaneously, is that correct?
It's my understanding not. I will defer that to my colleague. I believe typically we run one line or the other, but not both at the same time.
I see. Perhaps I will have to ask your colleague the next question, which is one line used in preference to the other, so to speak, as a backup, or used in that special requirement for this other company?
My colleague will have to answer that for you.
Fine. And we don't have a copy of your permit, and I'm not that familiar with the permits for this, but is there a requirement for schedule maintenance or testing? You've seen the permit, so you would know. Can you answer that?
Yes, yes, I can. Our permits state that we will perform maintenance in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications for the equipment. So our maintenance department would have those scheduled on either weekly, monthly, or quarterly preventive maintenance operations, depending on what it is that they're doing.
But there's no requirement for testing to see what the NOx levels are.
No.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions? Senator, do you have questions?
I think you answered the question, but repeat it just so I can digest it. In the permit, there's no requirement for testing this equipment that's 15 years old.
No, not for emissions. That comes from the Rule 1147.
Rule 1147 is pretty strict, wouldn't you say so?
Yes.
Wouldn't you be concerned about not passing the source test in a timely fashion as specified after 15 years of operation? That didn't cause you any concern?
No, it did not. I had no reason to expect it to fail. The burners are low NOx burners. They are supposed to operate at a low NOx level.
But the permits say that you granted the authority to operate the burners according to manufacturer specs, which means to verify whether or not you obtained the specs for these engines, you would have to test, wouldn't you?
I had no requirement to test.
The manufacturing spec is 25 parts, 25 or less.
Yes, yes.
Parts per million or less.
According to the documentation I have here,
Wasn't
yes.
it what you presented to us?
Yes.
When you want to verify, validate that specification prior to coming here today?
Well, in hindsight, yes, but I had no way of anticipating that this would happen, and I didn't foresee any problems.
Except for the fact that 1147 is very specific. The district talks about burners being online for 15 years. We should be skeptical of them. And then you were aware of all of that.
I did not frame it in my mind the way you're framing it now.
You're talking about PM, preventative maintenance, which means you should know whether or not preventative maintenance is required if you perform the test. You didn't do that.
I'm sorry?
Can you restate that? Because I don't think we've heard of any requirements they have not
You asked
performed.
what PM was. She says that preventative maintenance.
Yes, and she testified that they do preventative maintenance as required and specified by the manufacturer.
Right, therefore, as specified by the manufacturer. The manufacturer says 25 parts per million.
But it doesn't say test it.
Well, how do you achieve it unless you test it?
The manufacturer is guaranteeing that it actually does meet 25 parts per million.
Yes, but how you verify that with in regards to 1147?
With
if
the
it's
source
15 years old?
test, with the source
The
test,
source test.
at 15 years of age, as the rule requires.
Which they did and failed.
Yeah, but they were not diligent. The fact of the matter is that you had knowledge, or should have had knowledge, based on the permit that was issued to you, that you should be inclined, be with the manufacturer specification, meet the manufacturer specification, which is 25 parts per million. And you never tested to find out whether or not you were within that specification, according to 1147.
I think may I just stop you? I think you're misstating what the testimony was. The testimony was not that there was a requirement to meet all of the specifications and make sure you're meeting it. The requirement, as I heard the testimony, was in the permit it says you must do maintenance as is required by the manufacturer, and the testimony was that in fact they do the preventative maintenance as is required, but that there is no other requirement of testing in the permit. So based on that, if you have a question, I don't think I heard the recitation of the testimony correctly in your statement.
It's simple logic would suggest that if the manufacturer says the specs for these burners, source testing should be 25 parts or less per million, and you come into a deadline to determine whether or not you met that specification, then you would have tested in sufficient time to make a determination whether or not you're going to go out and retrofit with new burners or not. That was not done according to the testimony.
Do you have a question? Because we'll deliberate on this, because that's the very question we need to answer, or one of the very questions we need to answer.
Why didn't you do that?
As I said earlier, I did not expect them to fail the test. However, I did have a conversation with management at Carpenter Company when we were working on scheduling the test, and did introduce the idea that if they didn't pass, we needed to be prepared to buy new burners very quickly, that we needed to have a vendor online that was already an established vendor that could provide us with the equipment that we needed in a timely manner, that we be prepared to submit what's called a major expenditure request, which requires going all the way up to the owner of our company for authority to purchase those burners, and we did have that discussion. Just in the event that something happened that we weren't expecting. There was a discussion. Like I said, I didn't expect that to be the case, but it did turn out to be the case.
During that discussion, did he give you any idea that it would fail?
No.
Did he ask you whether or not there's a test had been done prior to the time you had the discussion?
No.
Dr. Lerner has a question.
You weren't there, so you may not be able to answer the question, but I think you said a few moments ago in your testimony that when the burners were first installed, they did pass the test. Are you?
No.
Were they source tested after the installation?
No, there is no requirement to do such a test.
That's okay. So the answer is no.
No.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know, because I thought you said, and I obviously that's why I'm asking the question, that you said that they did pass a test after installation, but I guess I misheard you.
No, I think you did hear me correctly, but I was referring to fiber line 1. Those burners were source tested at 15 years of age. We have 2 production lines.
I understand that. No, what I'm getting at is fiber line 2. When those were installed, were they source tested then to validate the fact that what you bought is what you got is what you bought?
Not to my knowledge. I was not working for the company at that time.
I understand that. I was just wondering if in the history of the file of the burners that you might have that information, because we don't know. You get what I'm saying?
I do.
This may be going on for 15 years, or it could have been gone 15 minutes before you did your first source test. We have no idea. Thank you.
I have a question because I don't know the answer. Things like burners, are they ever just certified by the AQMD or certified by ARB as meeting particular?
I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience with burners. This is my first, I mean, the other fiber line and this fiber line.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions for this witness?
So
Yes.
to your knowledge, there's, and you have the permit with you, or
I do not have the permit with me.
were there any conditions imposed by the AQMD when they issue the permit to do any kind of testing?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
Any other questions, Senator?
When the district testifies, I want to ask them whether or not they have a permit in their possession that's been granted for the purpose of using these burners at this location.
I'm sorry, are you asking if we have a permit for?
When the district testifies.
Oh, you'd like to see if the district has a copy of the permit? Do you have it? Looks like you might. Okay.
I do have a copy with me.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, do you have another witness you wish to be heard on the issues of good cause?
Yes.
Okay. If your witness can introduce himself by, again, stating your name, then spelling your name, and then stating your title with the company, and also finally just indicating for the record, the recorded record, whether you took the oath today.
Yes, my name is Dan Howersile. First name D-A-N, second name Howersile, H-O-W-E-R-Z-Y-L. And position is fiber line manager. And then, yes, I did take the oath today.
Did you want to ask him any questions, Ms. Stolzenberg, or is there anything in particular you wish for him to fill in, or do you just wish for him to answer questions by others?
If you're going to ask him the questions that I was going to, well, that I deferred to him, then I have nothing else to add.
Do we recall which questions? I know, Ms. Reichart, you did.
Yes, I think the main focus was about the temperatures. So if you could describe the temperature that both lines, the burners on both lines are operated at.
Okay. Yeah, both lines have the capability to run at the same temperature, same set points. But since the product that's run on line 2, the majority of the time is run at 365 degrees, that's the temperature it was tested at.
And then what temperature?
Whereas on line
oh,
number
sorry.
1, since we run a product that runs at a little bit higher temperature, I believe the line was tested at a higher temperature. I don't know if it was set at max when it was tested or what, but.
Oh, so you don't remember what, or you're not aware of what temperature line 1 was tested at?
No, I'm not aware of.
Okay. I'm trying to ascertain because it seems like there may be an issue with the temperature that it's being run at.
So yeah, if the line was set at maximum temperature when it was tested, it may have passed or probably would have performed better.
Okay, but we don't have any evidence as to what line 1, the temperature that line 1 was tested at.
No, I don't.
And then line 1, the temperature can vary though, or?
Yeah, depending on what product you're running.
And
If
what's
you're running a
the
product that-
range for line 1?
If you're running a product that's softer, then it, maybe you'll have the temperature at 330 degrees. If you're running a product that's firmer, then you'd have a maximum, which would be like 415 degrees. But the majority of the time, it's run around 395, 400 degrees, so.
Okay, that's all I had.
I said one quick question, and that is, are you aware of whether the manufacturer of the burners had any does it specify a temperature at which the burners need to be run in order to meet the 25 ppm? Is that part of the specifications of the burner? Do you know?
No, I'm not aware of what temperature that would be, no.
Okay. Do you know whether there would be such a specification? Or I just want to parse out what you're aware of. Are you aware?
No, I'm not aware
of whether they
what it
even
would be.
specify any temperature? Okay. Well, Dr. Lerner had a question.
Yeah, my same question, there must be some sort of a curve reflecting NOx emission and temperature. And the question is it true that in fact at a higher temperature you burn less NOx? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of it as far as, like, it's not like some knowledge I had prior to this, but in going through this process and from hearing information that Stephanie has learned, then I became aware that, kind of like she indicated earlier, that these burners are rated for a much higher temperature than what we're actually running them at, so. But prior to that, I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you one other question. Are both lines run, I was asking, is line 1 run predominantly and line 2 is a backup, or do they run together, or do they run just as the orders that come in require them to be run?
Yeah, line 1 is run predominantly. Out of the total amount of material we produce, only about 14 to 16%. I went through the information of the last 3 years. So over the last 3 years, between like 14 and 16% of what we make is made on line 2.
Gotcha.
And so yeah, the majority of what we make is made on line 1, but there's the one, like was indicated earlier, the one product that we have to make on line 2. And then line 2 is also a backup. If line 1 breaks down, then we can run everything on, or the majority of everything on line 2.
Have there been problems with line 1?
Not frequently, but maybe 2 times, 3 times a year, we might have some sort of a breakdown where we have to run on line 2, so.
I see, but, okay. I'm going to ask the same question that I asked before. How long have you been with the company?
19 years.
Wonderful. So you were there early on when the line 1 burners were put in, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Were you aware of any source testing that was done at the time of installation or shortly after that you could recall?
No, I'm not aware of any, or I don't
Okay.
remember any. So.
Okay. I think our test drive, if you want to be honest to it, the question is,
Is there a question? Because that type of thing, we
Okay,
should
it was
save it
just an
for
argument of
deliberation.
analogy. I'm sorry.
Definitely
I
save, but you
withdraw
can
the
say
comment.
it during
Yeah.
deliberation, though.
Okay, fine.
Let's try to
I
ask the
withdraw the
questions.
comment.
Mr. Balago-Polo.
And you mentioned that the Sealy baits can only be done on line 2? Or
Yeah,
Is
it's actually for CERTA, not
for
Sealy,
certain,
so.
okay. And why is that only,
It's the product we can only make on line 2 is a product called ProTech, and it's a FR, or fire retardant product, that's bedding manufacturers are required to put in their beds now. And since line 2 is a newer line, it was built so that it could produce this product and have all the proper tracking of all the, like, in order to make the product, you have to track the blend and have records of what the blend was. And line 1 doesn't have the capability to track the blend within a close enough standard deviation to be able to prove that the blend was correct when you're making the product. Line 2 has that capability, so that's why we're only able to make that fire retardant product on line 2.
so the line is a continuous process, so it's not like you can interchangeably use the oven, mix and match the product, and basically you start and finish on that line? Is that?
Yeah, that's correct.
And the oven that you have, you get 4 burners, are they in 4 separate zones, or are they
Yeah, they are separate
Are
zones.
they all
that's correct.
fired simultaneously, or are they at different temperatures? Do you know, each zone, is it hotter in the beginning and lower towards the end? Do you recall?
They're all set at the same temperature.
All the same
but-
temperature?
But yeah, like the first one is the product comes in the oven, we'll work a little bit harder than the last one that's at the end of the oven, you know.
But they're
just
set
because,
for the
yeah,
same temperature.
Same set point.
And they all go to a common exhaust from all four.
Yeah, that's
They go
correct.
into and they don't have individual stacks for each of the zones or anything like that.
No,
I think it was mentioned that your usage is very low. I noticed, and the excess emission was very low, 181 pounds that was stated in the petition. I'm not sure how that, are you familiar with how that calculation was done?
Can we save that for if we get to the substantive hearing? I mean, unless you need it because we are still in good cause
Oh, okay.
portion.
No, I think it was mentioned that, Stephanie, I think you mentioned the usage, the burner manufacturer or the burner contractor you had came and said you can make do with 2:4 because your usage is low and you don't need that high of a BTU rating to operate the oven.
That was part of a discussion about possible options. We don't know that that would work. And we can't even try it unless we're able to operate outside of the requirements of Rule 1147, which is what this hearing is about. So we don't know that. That's something we will be looking at if that's possible. You would have to find burners that fit in the exact same, basically, equipment that exists now, so it might require too much modification, too much re-engineering. It may not be possible. We would like to look at that option and see if it is possible to downsize the burners to a 0.8 million BTU, about half of what we have now. If that's not feasible, of course, we would have to replace the burners completely.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Byrd?
When line 1 breaks down, you said you use line 2, correct?
yeah, that's correct.
And if there's a shutdown on line 1, you use line 2, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So what happens if there's a shutdown on line 2?
Then we would have to let the customer know that we were broken down, that there would be well, one thing that's fortunate is, since it's only 16% of our business, we're not running the line every day, and we have a certain amount of lead time. So that helps to avoid, like, say the line was down for a day or two.
So how
and
much
we had
lead
to order
time?
the parts,
I'm sorry.
we would be able to probably still get the product done for them in time.
How much lead time do you normally need?
They normally give us like 2 or 3 days of lead time on this particular product because they ordered in full truckload quantities. So since it takes a longer period of time to produce, they give us 2 or 3 days of lead time.
Has it ever happened that line 2's been shut down since you've been there?
Yeah, sometimes you might have a failure of a motor or a drive or something and you have to order it from the East Coast or something like that, so it'll be down for a day or two. So,
Okay, so a day or two is as long as it's ever been down?
yeah, from what I can recall, that's probably about the longest that it's been down. So.
Okay, thank you.
Since July 1st, has line 2 been operated?
No, it has not.
What have you done with regard to, I'm sorry, we had Sealy, but it's CERTA. Has there been any orders for CERTA in that time?
Yeah, we do have one order pending, but what we did is we ran a little extra stock prior to that second test that we did. So we had an order from them, so we filled that order, and so they were supplied with material for a short period of time at least. So.
And that was a question, 2 questions then. First one is, do you often do that or have the capability to run orders in advance and stock up?
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, since we only run the line 2 or 3 days a week, if we know that maybe it's been, we only run about 1 truckload a week for them on average. So if we know that it's been, 3, 4, or 5 days since they ordered and another order's coming, we'll just run a load to stock, and that way as soon as the order is received, we can label it up and get it loaded for them.
So how many orders? Has there been 2 truckloads since July 1st, 1 truckload since July 1st?
Well, it's the one truckload that was delivered and then the one that's on order. Plus there's now another one they have two truckloads on order at this point. So,
And how much do you have in storage?
we don't have any at this point. We used it all up.
Okay. So at this point, you are backed up by 2 truckloads that have been ordered?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
One's dated for the 12th, I believe it is, and the other one's like the 17th.
And CERTA has no other supplier?
Not that I'm aware of. Since it's that FR product, there's some testing involved for the manufacturer to be approved to be a supplier for it. So.
I know you said line 2 was specifically created for this product, but under an emergency, there's just no way to switch it over to line 1?
No.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator?
Do you have a shipping and receiving department at your plant?
Yes, we do.
Do you verify critical contract items when they come in, see if they meet the specs?
Such as raw materials.
Do you ever verify critical contract items for determine whether or not they meet the specification?
Certain raw materials, there are, like for example, that FR product, when we receive the raw materials in, then we have to verify that they're good. Yes, that's correct. So,
would you consider this equipment in question to be a critical contract item?
yeah, I don't know if I'd call it a critical contract item since it's not something you're continually receiving in. It's like a one-time purchase type of thing. But
Critical contract is one which is absolutely necessary to operate the business. This is a critical contract item, yes or no?
I don't know. That's a difficult question to answer. So.
Well, it's one that should convince me one way or another. If it's critical, then you probably, I don't know, I'll deal with that a little later. But the manufacturer specification says that the 25 parts per million, et cetera, that it would operate within that specification or less. Do you have a reason to believe, to know why they specified that amount in terms of emission?
Well, they're the ones that indicated that that's what it would do. They didn't place that upon us to prove it. They said this is what it can do. It's kind of like the Toyota Prius was referenced earlier. When you buy a Toyota Prius, the manufacturer says it will meet this amount of miles per gallon. So you trust that Toyota Prius was tested by Toyota, and that it's going to meet that amount of miles per gallon. So when we buy these burners, we're trusting that the manufacturer did the testing and that it actually does meet what they said. So.
But you're aware of 1147 rule, and that required operating within a certain specification, not to exceed a certain limit. Is that correct?
What was that? What was that again?
You're aware of Rule 1147, district rule, which says that the emission shall not exceed a certain level, 30 parts per million. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
You put it right here. You should be. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you're aware of that. Then you want to have some certainty that the equipment which you're operating met that specification, yes or no?
Yeah, and that's why when it was required to do the testing at the 15 years, that's why we did the testing. So.
Right, well, so at the time you acquired the equipment, it may not have met the 25 parts per million at that point in time, except if you do an acceptance test. And you're saying an acceptance test was not performed, is that correct?
At that time when the burners were first installed, from what we know, there was no source test done at that time, no.
Do you ever have it? You're familiar with what's known as acceptance test when you acquire a product to determine whether or not they meet the specs as stated in the manufacturer, by the manufacturer?
So you're referring to like our raw materials again that we receive in, or?
No, that's quite all right. It's called due diligence. Let me just say that after the June 9th failure, the consultant performing the test speculated that the burners had likely failed the test due to a rich fuel condition caused by inadequate airflow through the burners. Were you aware of that? You wrote it. And my question is, were you aware of it? That speculation?
I'd probably have to defer to Stephanie with regards to that.
I need somebody to answer that question.
May I?
Yes, at this time, I think you may.
That was speculation. I added that to the petition as information for the board. I don't know whether that was the case or was not the case. That was spoken to me by the consultant, but source tester. He speculated about what may or may not have been wrong with the burners. It was not confirmed.
You brought the gas company out to make some adjustments, see if they meet the specs. Did anyone do something different in terms of the fuel that we're using? Maybe if the fuel was a problem based on speculation, was there any attempt to change it, octane or whatever, to get an adequate operation?
I don't know what the gas company technician did. What he said to me at the time was that he could not get it to perform within, to be under 30 parts per million. He did not tell me what he did. I did not watch him work on those burners. I wouldn't know what he was doing anyway, even if I had watched him.
Your tester stated that there may have been inadequate airflow through the burners. Was there any attempt made to adjust the airflow through the burners?
I don't know what the technician did or did not do.
Your technician next to you can answer that question, hopefully.
He did not do the testing, but if you can answer, please do. If not, please state that you cannot.
Don't lead the witness.
All I said was, if you can answer, please answer. If you can't say you can't, that is not leading the witness. Thank you.
Introduce the witness. You said if they can't answer, they can't answer.
I did not say that. I said if he did not do the
Can you answer
test.
the question, yes or no?
No, I'm not able to answer the question as to what the technician did or did not do.
Or you gotta take the same position.
Any other questions for this witness? Do you have any other witnesses for good cause?
I do not.
Ms. Reichart, does the district have any witnesses for good cause?
The district was not planning to call any witnesses, but it sounds as if the board wanted information from the district engineer. So if that's the case, I can call District Engineer Hassan Namaki.
Yes.
If you could please state and spell your name for the record.
Yeah, my name is Hassan Namaki, it's spelled,
It's on.
oh, it's on, correct. Spelled Hassan, last name Namaki, Namaki.
And what is your position here at the district?
I'm an air quality engineer.
And did you take the oath this morning?
Yes, I did.
I believe a question was asked regarding this facility's permit. Do you have a copy of the permit here with you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And is there any testing requirement at the time of installation required either in the permit or in the rule?
At that time, there were no applicable rule for the ovens specifically. However, there was back requirement. The permit was issued with no source test requirement. I inquired about why there was not a source test requirement in the permit, and the answer I was given that such a burner has passed that 25 ppm multiple times, and they didn't need to put in the permit anymore.
So at the time of the permit evaluation, they looked at the burner that was being installed and determined that it met BACT at the time of installation, and it was sufficient to go ahead and install it without performing a source test?
Correct.
And then the 15-year source test, that is just a rule requirement, correct?
There is a new rule after the permit was issued, Rule 1147, which required this type of equipment to be tested, and they need to meet a certain level, yes. And apparently they have tested and they don't meet the rule requirement.
And the only requirement there is that it must be by July 1st after 15 years of operation. Is that right?
I cannot recite the rule
You don't have the rule with
accurately,
you?
correct.
Okay. Okay. I'll leave it to any questions by the facility or the board.
Ms. Stolzenberg, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Dr. Lerner has a question.
The question I have is there's this, I think it's self-generated controversy about the relationship of NOx to temperature, operating temperature. So can you explain to me what the 30 ppm is? Is that for a given temperature or across a range of temperatures? And is there any, that's question number one. Question number two, well, you can answer that one first.
Okay, well, generally, if you're referring to oven temperature, it's different than the combustion zone temperature. The oven temperature, it's what heat is supplied to the oven. You can run your oven at 300 degrees, but your combustion zone could be either 1200 or 1800 or 2000 degrees. So the combustion zone temperature actually causes thermal NOx, which the higher the temperature, the more NOx you generate. There is another issue here with air-to-flow ratio. If you don't have a correct air-to-flow ratio, you can produce NOx when you don't have a good air fuel mixer. And apparently, that's the problem here. Well, of course, that's what's being claimed, that since the air-fuel ratio, they're running this burner at very, very low rating, they're not getting a good mixture of air and fuel. I don't know if I have answered your question, but I can. The oven temperature, if they're referring to, has nothing to do with the combustion zone temperature.
Gotcha. Then let me just ask another question about that. So the combustion zone temperature is what is going to produce the NOx?
Correct.
Okay.
And the higher the temperature, the more NOx it generates.
The higher the temperature.
Correct.
This seems to be a little bit in contradiction of the testimony I heard a few minutes ago from the respondent. So now I'm a little bit confused.
Okay.
But I will accept what you're saying. In general, this permit was given this sort of carte blanche because of the past experience by the district, that
Correct,
this was a solid citizen in terms of it was predictable, and that you didn't have to have a source test done at the time of installation.
We generally require such a permit to be tested. However, in this case, since they were using a burner which has been tested multiple times, there was no such a requirement on the permit.
Okay. May I ask this question? When you say this burner, you mean this company's burner, this particular model?
Correct.
You've had experience with?
Correct.
Not this burner per se, the one under question?
Correct.
Okay, very good.
This model burner.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
Mr. Balagopalan.
Mr. Namaki, and you mentioned that the engineer did not put a condition on the permit when it was issued to do a source test. Now, you mentioned it's not typical, I mean, to do that for a new source, for BACT, or is it?
It's not typical, but in this case, it seems it was applied.
Because, but it was a different, it's not so much as the burner, it was a different oven. The burner was configured for the oven, and it could have different results based on the testing.
I agree with you. I'm not in agreement with the work which was done previously on assessing this permit.
However, there was, to the respondent, they were not required to test it because there was no condition listed on the permit. Had there been a condition, then they would have tested it and we would have found out if there was a problem.
Correct. If there was such a test requirement, probably they would have tested the equipment and probably they would have found a problem if it existed at that time.
Right. So for whatever the reason, the engineer at that time felt that this was a burner that could meet the 30 ppm requirement.
I'm
and-
so sorry. I just
Oh,
want
is
to
it-
caution Mr. Nomaki to not,
Spec-
speculate on what may have happened in a different, you can speculate about what happened with the permit and what was not in or not in the permit, but if you do not have knowledge as to what may have happened if a source test had been done previously, please try not to speculate. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's, I just want to know, there was no condition imposed on the applicant to do a source test to meet the back requirement.
And no, there was not a source test
And
condition.
the back requirement at that time was
According to permit evaluation was 30 ppm.
30 ppm, okay, which is the same limit as 1147 currently.
Correct.
And to go back to Dr. Lerner's question, typically the higher the temperature, the more the NOx, correct?
Correct. Temperature above 2,000 degrees at the combustion zone, they produce more NOx than lower temperatures.
And 1147 has different temperature ranges and different NOx limit based on that. Is that your understanding?
Correct. It has several temperatures for different equipment for the different NOx levels.
Right. And in the case of oven, looking at Rule 1147, it's the same limit up to 1,200 degrees, and then anything above 1,200 degrees, they were given a higher limit of 60 ppm.
Is that correct?
Yes, thank you.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And you can find that on Table 1 of the
Yes.
rule, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions?
You want me to say?
You have a question? Yes, Senator.
Thank you.
I called on you many times.
You stated earlier that you accept in the permit, even though it specified the limits for emission. And you stated, I believe, that there have been a number of tests performed to assure us that this equipment was operating within a specified limit. Is that correct?
I should rephrase that. That type burner has been tested, not the same equipment.
That type burner had been tested. Was that given to you in writing or was it verbal?
It wasn't my experience. It was other people's experience with such a burners that they have permitted such equipment, that those burners actually met the manufacturer claim of 25 ppm.
And the district, you believe the district would require a written statement verifying that the case? And if so, you have a copy of that written statement? Otherwise, it's just hearsay.
Is it the district's experience in testing and permitting, or is it the petitioner's experience?
That was not my
that caused
question.
it? Okay, well, I think,
My question is whether or not the district was informed in writing that this equipment had passed these specs, these tests.
Generally, in this situation, I don't want to refer to this specific thing. Manufacturer provide a spec sheet for the equipment. Stating that this burner will meet such emission levels. However, in addition to those specifications, according to the engineers I spoke to, this burner type was tested many times before, and they actually met manufacturer claim.
So there's nothing written in the record that says that's the case.
I have no knowledge of those records. I should look for them and actually give you an answer, but I don't have them here at this time.
Well, the next question is then, you heard the respondent's testimony, where they said they have no acceptance test to verify that the equipment met the specs, manufacturer specification. And my next question to you then, Rule 1147 was first introduced as a requirement when, or do you know?
I don't recall the first.
It states it on the rule. The answer is December of 2008.
So after December 2008, the district knew or should have known whether or not this equipment was meeting the specification.
But then the requirement in
question?
C,
Is that a question?
the requirement in
Question is-
C1 spells out when it was required to be tested.
No, the requirement was in play, are you asked, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
If in 2008, forget the letter,
Okay,
that the district adopted Rule 1147, which states the specification for operating this equipment in the district. Is that correct?
correct.
Okay, fine. Then, did the district ever, after that rule had been adopted, did the district ever require the respondents to test and report the findings, the results of the test to the district?
There are some guidelines in the rule when the equipment has to be tested. I think it was talked about earlier.
I think the witness testified that he was not familiar with those specific portions of the rule requirements.
May I say at this time that all board members should refer to Rule 1147C1. It is very clearly spelled out what the requirement is for testing. When the testing must be done on or after, it says on or after January 1st, 2010, this requirement comes into being. And for burners that are already in existence, it is testing must be done by, to ensure compliance with the standards that are listed in Table 1 by July 1st of the year a unit becomes 30, oh, I'm sorry.
It's 15 years.
It says 35, but,
15
okay,
years.
perhaps I have it wrong, but
15 years.
in my thing. But in any event, it states it.
So, yeah, 15 years. And so, did you ever visit this plant?
No, I'm not the main permit engineer for the facility. I'm just covering for the engineer who's on vacation. But I have worked with the facility once before. Never visited the facility, though.
Were you aware of the findings and recommendation of the company that tested this equipment on June 8th, June 9th?
I became aware of it yesterday. I had no prior knowledge of violation or variance till yesterday morning.
Thank you, sir.
Sure, my pleasure.
Anyone else have any questions? I know, Ms. Reichart, you said you weren't planning to put on any witnesses with regard to good cause, so I assume you have no further witnesses.
No further witnesses.
Okay. So then let's wrap up good cause, and I don't know, Ms. Stolzenberg, whether you wish to make any kind of summary statement or concluding statement with regard to good cause, the good cause portion of the hearing, before we deliberate.
I do not, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Reichart, I don't know if you have any last statement to make on good cause.
After listening to the evidence presented, the district is not opposed to a finding of good cause.
Thank you. Board members, anyone wish to begin the discussion with regard to good cause in this matter? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yeah, I think we can find a finding for good cause here, and you may need to help me if I'm doing it correctly. But I think when the permit was issued in 2003 or 2004, there was no condition listed on the permit to let the facility know they have to test it and what test method they have to use to demonstrate compliance with the best available control technology requirement at that time when the permit was issued, which was 30 ppm. So, and I think they were aware of when the testing due dates were, and it appeared they were maybe because of the prior testing that was done on line 1 in the Alban and the certitude that that unit can pass. They were quite confident, it appears, that this unit can pass. And however, the testing proved otherwise. We do not know at this point how long they've been out of compliance, from the 30 ppm limit, because no testing has been done till June 9th. But I think once they found out, I think they took the steps necessary to correct that, either whatever they're proposing to do, to either modify the oven and replace the burners, or modify the burners, and I think they've taken the steps necessary. Just the timing was delayed until the very end, towards the deadline date. But I think maybe given the past history of the existing oven, and with the same manufacturer, same burners, they probably had some confidence that it would pass.
I agree. I think that we should be very hesitant to put upon facilities additional requirements that are not in the rules or their permits. There are enough rules already and permit requirements with which they must comply. So to require testing when whoever the permitting engineer was at the time, in his or her infinite wisdom, did not believe that testing would be necessary, whether it was because, as the testimony was, it's likely that this particular burner had been permitted so many times and had been tested so many times to meet the 25 ppm at which it was certified, or whatever the wording would be, at which the manufacturer had said it could meet. There was just no requirement put in. 1147 wasn't in existence at the time. So that's not the troubling portion for me. I did come into this hearing troubled by the fact that these are 15 years old, and this rule has been obviously in effect for quite some time, and yet it wasn't until May 24th when the initial test was done, and then even later when it actually occurred. But I do think it is powerful, the testimony that these same burners did pass after 15 years in line 1 in 2014. And so, and also there was testimony that there are other boilers, there are other equipment that also require source testing. And it seems that this particular petitioner is diligent in maintenance. And so it does not expect failure because it's up on its testing, it's up on its maintenance, and doesn't generally fail. The only date that I'm left struggling with a little bit is the June 9th failure. And could they have come in sooner? The testimony was they weren't even aware of the variance, and I think it's a testament to the company that there are so many pieces of equipment, and yet it's only the second time, it appears, that they've been in, and Ms. Stolzenberg has been there since 2009 and doesn't remember coming in. So, so there's that to contend with. I mean, not knowing is not usually an excuse, but they were given what they felt was a confident statement by the tester that it could be fixed by tuning. And they did diligently try to do that on Saturdays, paying overtime. So, and to be honest, they couldn't have been in compliance, it doesn't seem, by this point anyway, and would have to come in for a non-noticed hearing. So a little bit on the fence, but I think I'm leaning towards good cause. I see Ms. Bird has something to add.
I'm on the fence, but I'm leaning in the other direction. While I do understand that it wasn't initially in the permit, and I know the rule came into effect later, these burners are 15 years old, and I know that that's why the district is saying test them, and so that makes me wonder if the district set a date of testing 15 years after the burners were put into use, if there's some concern on the part of the district that things may shift after 15 years. There's some reason for that 15 years. I didn't get testimony, but it leads me to believe that. And my leaning on the other side of the fence also has to do with when they had their initial test, even though the burners were 25 ppm when they first purchased them or first operated them, we're talking about they were more than twice as much in the first testing on, I guess that's June 9th, and that they believed that they could get them down to 30, even though they were almost, well, I think it's 50 something, in excess of 50 ppm, which I just didn't think, well, that would be reasonable to believe that they would be down to less than 30 if they were over 50, even with tuning. Usually tuning, well, when we've heard cases, usually tuning is not when they're that much out of compliance, but I'm not an engineer, but that's usually the case. And then the other side of it is line 1 and line 2. While I understand that line 1 passed, and that might lead you to believe that line 2 had passed, they're not the same configuration. One has 3 burners, one has 4 burners. So that raised a question for me. And then while they have done source testing in the past, I still ask the question of how much in advance would they do source testing, which is not something that could be answered right now by petitioner, to know that they, in the event that they did fail, because if you're pushing a test to June 9th, while you believe you will pass, if you don't pass, and you're supposed to be completed with that testing by the 1st of July, that's really, really cutting it close. We've heard, not just today, but just in the history of source testing, how long it takes to get source tests scheduled. So it just makes me wonder if that time was adequate for planning to get that testing done. And then I had one other, let's see. Yeah, so even with that, I was thinking that if they knew that they had a failure to the extent which they had on June 9th, that timeliness would have brought them to get for petition sooner than July. Let's see the date that this was done. July 3rd. Yeah. So those are my questions, and those are my issues, and that's why I'm kind of leaning toward not finding good cause based on the good cause guidelines that we have.
It's interesting. While I was thinking about what you were saying, I was raising in my mind another issue, and that led me to another point I think I should probably make. I was going to ask Ms. Bird what you thought about the fact that, when we're on an interim variance, we're looking at these factors, but we tend to weigh them and balance them, and unlike for the actual variance. And so I was going to ask what you thought of the idea that if we deny the interim variance today, there would be an impact because of CERTA. But then I was reminded by testimony when asked, have they been shut down since July 1st? And the answer was yes, and that they had, in advance of the second testing, actually stocked up on additional product in anticipation that they may not pass. So there was an anticipation that they may not pass. And in fact, they were stocking up on it, but yet not. But I will say in their defense, looking for alternatives, looking for additional, for alternative burners, and doing their diligence in that way to try to be in compliance. I do believe that, no matter what I'm saying, I do believe that this is a petitioner that wishes to be in compliance. The only question is whether they should have come before us and gotten a noticed hearing sooner. And I do think the fact that they were stocking up weighs a little bit against them. Senator, you had some.
All petitioners that come before us wish to be in compliance. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. The thing that concerns me is that there's no test data provided to the district by the respondents. I consider that to be mutual negligence, in my view. I consider it to be mutual negligence. The fact of the matter is that when Rule 1147 was adopted, that raised a red flag. The equipment had been in business since 2003, now 2008, 1147 was adopted. They're saying, hey, that's something, and you and the respondents were aware of that. Therefore, this is something we should look at. The district, I think, knowing that this equipment is in operation in this district, could have, or probably should have, saying, perform the test, show us the test data, is whether or not this equipment would pass, which was not requested. Maybe you say it's not required, but 1147 eventually is going to say it's going to be required. So thinking ahead, as we should do at all times, if we're going to clean the air up in this district, that when the rules are adopted, even the equipment is continually operating, it would not disqualify from continue to operate because the 15 years had not run, but it would give them advance notice that action should be taken to be in compliance and show the test data that you in fact are, which they never did. And so therefore, in my view, I think that I'm not supportive of this motion at this point in time at all.
I think you make a valid point. I think Ms. Burr was making the same point. I don't think 1147 didn't impose any new requirement on these burners, actually, because what we heard was when it was permitted, it was permitted to BACT, and BACT was the same, 30 parts per million. So it didn't put on a new requirement and raise red flags as to whether or not it should be tested or anything like that at that time. But I do think what it did, and I think that's the point you're making, Senator, and the point that Ms. Byrd made, that 1147, what it did do was say, okay, we know that as equipment gets older, it tends to get a little bit higher emitting over time, and so we need you to test it at a certain time to make sure that it is still meeting. And it's that particular test date that I think is relevant because that's from which they're seeking, that deadline from which they're seeking a variance. Anyone else have any thoughts? Anybody interested in a motion, either for or against? Anyone wish to make a motion either in favor?
Well, I'll make a motion in favor of finding good cause.
And all you need to do is,
Read the, okay,
Mr. Balagopalan is new.
yes. So walk me through.
In the matter of, all you have to do is say, in the matter of Carpenter Company, case number, and then give the case number, and then say that you move to have a hearing based on good cause. That's all you need to say.
Okay. In the manner of Carpenter Company case number 5356-2, I believe there's sufficient evidence presented for good cause, and we should move forward with it.
If you give me 1 minute, I will determine whether I will second. I'm going to ask if there is a second, and if not, just one moment. I wanted to read one more thing. I'm going to second the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Byrd, how do you vote on that motion?
No.
Dr. Lerner, how do you vote on that motion?
Yes.
Senator, how do you vote on that motion?
No.
Okay. Motion passes 3-2. And the reason why I took a moment was because I do not believe that there was sufficient time. My vote was because I don't believe that there was sufficient time to provide for public notice once the testing was done, given what needs to be done, and that a regular variance may very well be required, and that's what they thought would be required. And based on the evidence that I heard, I do think that they had sufficient, hindsight is always 20/20, but I do think they had sufficient reasonableness to believe that when they began testing on May 24th, that would be sufficient time. Anyone
Madam
else wish
Chair,
to? Yes.
Once the
Senator.
vote is taken and announced, any discussion beyond that point is out of order.
Thank you for that, Senator. I was just explaining my vote for the record. And anyone else may as well. Okay, so it passes 3-2. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 15-minute break, and we're going to come back for the substantive portion of the, for the interim variance proceeding. So we are off the record until 10 of. Thank you. We're back on the record. The doctor's just going to grab his coffee cup. So we're going to do the preliminaries to begin the second phase of the hearing today. And the first preliminary, I'd like to ask, Ms. Stolzenberg, whether you wish to incorporate into this hearing all of the testimony and evidence from the prior hearing, meaning just a few minutes ago.
Yes, please.
And Ms. Reichart, do you have any objection to that?
No objection.
Okay. And Ms. Stolzenberg, while we're still waiting for the doctor to come back, he can probably hear it in the back, but are you familiar with the second stage and the 6 findings that need to be made and you need to produce evidence of in order to receive a variance today?
Briefly.
Okay. And I'm going to ask if the Madam Clerk could put them on. So there they are, and you can refer to them throughout the hearing, but you can see that they're, some of them are similar to what we went through, including conditions beyond reasonable control is very similar to some of the issues we had to grapple with, but we will need to hear about excess emissions and maybe a little bit more to fill in the gaps of what we did not cover. That wasn't relevant to the first part of the hearing. So I'm going to ask at this time if you have any opening statement you'd like to make, and it's up to you whether you do, with regard to the substantive hearing itself.
I do not.
And Ms. Reichart, do you have any opening?
Subject to compliance with the proposed conditions, which I will present to the board at this time, and the testimony presented, the district is not opposed to the granting of this variance.
Ms. Stolzenberg, what do you think makes most sense for you? Do you have in mind what testimony, additional testimony you'd like to begin with? Do you want to go through each of the 6 findings and figure out if there's any holes that you wish to fill for the board? However you wish to
I will
proceed.
allow you to take the lead in that, please. This is our first exposure to this process, so.
Okay. Perhaps then it would be good to begin. Oh, I see we have some conditions. We probably should take a few minutes off the record to review these as well. So we've just received proposed interim variance conditions from the district, and so we're going to mark this as Exhibit A for the district. A is in Apple. I think it would probably be a good idea to begin with either yourself or, I can't recall the other gentleman's name offhand, Mr. Hauersile, whether either one of you would like to testify as to excess emissions and any of the more technicalities, and then we can ask any questions we may have with regard to all the 6 findings.
I can respond to that. When I submitted the petition to the AQMD, I had no way of actually accurately quantifying what the excess emissions would be. We did not have stack flow data, so the calculations provided at that time were arbitrary based on just a best guess. As of this morning, we do have actual stack flow test data. We had the compliance source tester come back this morning, and he provided me with pounds per day emissions, excess emissions. He has calculated, I believe you have that data provided by Rebecca, and he has calculated on an 8-hour per day the NOx emissions to be 1.445 pounds per day if we operate line 2 for 8 hours a day. So each day that the line would run, we would have, for 8 hours operation, 1.445 pounds of NOx emissions.
Let me just interrupt you for one moment just to mark for the record. We've received several pages of email correspondence and what looks like calculations. And the top is from Stephanie Stolzenberg, dated Wednesday, July 11th, 2018 at 8:48 a.m. And we'll mark that as exhibit number 1 for the petitioner. I'm sorry, Senator, did you have, were you trying to indicate that you wanted to speak? I thought I heard. No. Okay. Ms. Stolzenberg, did you have anything else to add?
No.
Okay, then at this time I will ask, Ms. Reichart, do you have any questions at all?
Yes,
to the witness?
Thank you. I wanted to, I have a couple of questions about the excess emissions. First, my engineer has advised me that in the permit evaluation, it was, your operating hours were set at 16 hours per day. Are you actually only operating at 8 hours per day?
No, no, and I may have to defer a partial answer to come from Dan Howersile. I just asked for an 8-hour rate. That way we could use that as a baseline, and if we needed to further calculate from there, we could.
Okay, so these, the pounds per day of 1.445, what is that based on?
An 8-hour day.
Okay, so how many hours are you actually okay, so do you want to wait then? I guess it's the other witness for him to answer those questions.
Okay, yes, let's
Okay,
wait, and
okay.
we'll bring him
We'll
up.
ask more about that. Also, I wanted to find out if a calculation had been done to say how much of those are excess, the excess emissions. Would that be him as well?
I would have to go back to the source tester because I don't know how we would quantify that. Because we don't know what it was operating at before. If, if it was at 30 parts per million in compliance,
Okay, well, perhaps I might be able to have my engineer testify as to that. So you began to discuss kind of the different options, and then we cut it off. So could you just talk a little bit more detail about what the possible options are for coming into compliance?
Yes, we had, as I mentioned earlier, a gentleman came in, gentleman was by the name of Jeff Dorfner, and he works with Worth Gas Equipment, and they are combustion specialists, systems and sales. So he visited the plant yesterday, and he was explaining to us the possible alternative routes we can take to achieve compliance. One was if we were to receive a variance to operate until we get a regular variance, if we get the interim variance, he could send a technician out. That technician could come out and look at whether shutting off one or two of the burners, right, and then running the oven at its operating temperature and seeing what we get emissions-wise, if we would be in compliance with the NOx requirement in Rule 1147, if we would be under the 30 parts per million. If so, then we could look at getting a permit modification to modify the configuration of the existing oven and remove one or two of the burners to see if it would comply. If so, we would make arrangements to do so, right? So that would, once we got a permit modification, of course, to remove existing equipment. That would be the less expensive route because we wouldn't be purchasing new burners. We might have to rewire and reconfigure part of the oven, and I'm told some of the baffling, which I'm really not sure what that means. I'm not a combustion engineer, so, but that's a possible route we could take. We can try that. If that is unsuccessful, the next route would be to downsize the burners because I am told, now I have no way of verifying this, like I said, I'm not a combustion engineer, but I am told that the burners that are existing now in that oven were way too big, too much capacity for the oven temperature that we're operating at. They never should have been sized so large. The other option would be to downsize, go to a burner that has about half the capacity, heat capacity that these burners do, and that we would surely be in compliance with the 30 parts per million requirement at that time. If we remove the 4 existing burners that we have that are 1.6 million BTU burners each, and went to a 2-burner configuration at 0.8 million BTUs, that those are rated to operate at a much lower NOx level, and that we would definitely achieve compliance that way.
So to be clear, either of those options would require permit modifications, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Have you reviewed the proposed interim variance conditions?
Yes.
Okay. And the first condition there is that by July 27th, petitioner shall file an application to either replace the burners or modify the configuration of the burners and pay for expedited permit processing. Will you have your evaluation completed and be able to file a permit modification by July 27th?
Yes.
Okay. And then, notwithstanding the time it will take for the permit processing, how much time will it take you to order parts and complete the modification if you were to just modify the burners, not replace them? Do you have an estimate of how long that would take?
I do not, but I feel confident stating that I believe we could achieve that within 30 days, if that's a viable option.
Okay, and then what about ordering replacement burners and installing those?
We would do that concurrently with the permit modification being reviewed. I believe there is a 6-week lead time on ordering the burners, so I would expect, we expect to have an evaluation completed within 1 week's time, within 1 week of today, to determine whether or not the reconfiguration of the existing oven would work. If it will not, then within a week's time, we should be able to say, okay, we're going to need to order new burners. I would immediately prepare the permit application requiring to do that. Concurrently, we would order the burners. I would say we would have the burners 6 weeks later, and well in advance have arranged to have the installation done as soon as we receive the permit modification. So I would say within 2 weeks or 30 days, certainly, of or
Receiving the.
that we could have that work completed.
Okay. And just to go back to the variance conditions, are you able to comply with all of the other timelines and reporting requirements and everything noted on those conditions?
Yes, the only question that I have has to do with item 10, and there is no date identified there, so I can't testify that I could comply with that.
Yes, thank you. That will be set by the board and the clerk. I had another question, and I believe this was in the petition, but just so it's clear on the record. Can you describe what the monetary loss would be if you were unable to operate this line during the variance period until you were able to actually complete the repair, or, whatever you need to do?
I've had some,
Can I modify that question?
Oh,
Because it is an interim variance, so the only relevant is between.
Until now and
Now and August
you.
22nd.
Yes, thank you.
I'm afraid I can't, I'll have to defer that to him to
Okay.
quantify.
Okay. Can you describe what actions you'll be taking during the variance period to minimize any excess emissions in terms of operations, or any actions you'd be taking?
I would say that we would run that line only when needed to minimize the excess emissions that are being emitted from our facility.
And so
because
does-
we know we're not in compliance with the rule requirement.
So does that mean you would only run line 2 when you had to process fabric specific to, that could only be processed on line 2?
Yes.
And approximately how frequently do you anticipate needing to operate that? Would that be for him? Okay. Okay, I think that's all the questions I have for this witness.
Thank you. I think at this time it would be appropriate for the board members to take a few minutes off the record to review the interim variance conditions and also formulate whether we have any other questions with regard to the findings we'll need to make. So we're off the record for a few minutes.
Fuel meter?
A what?
Do you have a fuel meter? to monitor how much fuel you're using?
No, we don't have a dedicated meter of gas on that line. That's the date that they want us to, oh, that's our next hearing date, sorry, for the regular variance. This is asking for interim. That's fine, but we can't underestimate.
Yeah, we only ever run the line one shift.
8 hours, 10 hours.
Okay, we are back on the record. I'm sure we all have questions. Anyone wish to start? Okay, go ahead. Why don't you go ahead, Mr. Balagopalat?
I had a question regarding your excess emission. What do we call that? We didn't mark this as,
We're still on the original witness, was that?
oh, okay.
Yes.
So on the email attachment that you provided from Ken Kumar, and the NOx ppm is showing 2.6. Do you know if that's corrected? What percent oxygen is it?
I believe it's to 3% O2, but this was all done very quickly, knowing that I needed to be here this morning. So I need to confer with him and verify exactly what his.
Then you're in compliance with 2. I mean, it's.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's,
Yeah.
I think that's something that has to be
Right.
revisited and calculated, and but
And I think Mary has conferred with Hassan here to come up with what they believe to be a more accurate calculation for emissions based on some data provided in that email this morning that would allow us to calculate fees, excess emissions fees.
okay. On condition, going back to the interim various conditions, condition number 7, it says you'll calculate daily NOx emission from the oven and provide daily NOx emission. How do you propose to do that?
I would create a spreadsheet with a formula in it, and Dan would record daily hours of production running, and we would be able to, well, I think it says here, we'll provide it monthly. We will record daily, but provide it monthly.
But what's the basis of how you're going to do it? You're not going to be doing testing daily. You're not going to get ppm levels daily. You're not. So it's the fuel usage, or how is the, what is the, how is the basis?
Well, I think you can calculate it based on, right, parts per million, and then we do have stack flow data per minute or per hour that we could use to calculate hourly emissions.
Okay, but then it'll stay a constant, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes,
So-
I would, yes.
Then what's the purpose of this condition? Unless you're monitoring daily and getting some values that, or you're monitoring the flow rate, if it's not going to change, then I don't see the purpose of this condition,
I believe that it would be based on because of the hours of usage may vary on a daily basis. I think that was the intent, but I can have the staff that drafted it, if you're interested in understanding what their concerns were and why they wanted that condition.
Sure, yeah. Yes, the hours could be a factor in the emission, but there is no limit in the permit condition or something. It's limited them to the daily emission. There is no permit requirement saying you should be less than 5 pounds or whatever, so.
Right, I think it's just so that we can have a record of how much they're using, how often they're actually using the oven.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
So that I understand, so the emissions are the same on startup as they are running 2 hours later, is that correct?
I don't know, I don't know.
Is that something that your other witness can answer? Yeah.
I don't believe so. I would assume they're the same.
Okay. Do you know, based on, is it CERTA? Now I'm getting a little confused. Based on experience over time, how many hours or how many days, let's say with days, do you anticipate that you would be running line 2?
We can confirm this with my colleague, but I believe what we expect to be would be the norm, which is 2 to 3 days per week, and about 7 hours a day, 2 to 3 times a week.
And can you provide more information on, given that 2 to 3 days per week, what do we have, 5 more weeks? I'm not sure, I don't have it in front of me. 7 hours a day or whatever, that many orders. If you were not given a variance today, what the loss would be monetary-wise? Do you know that?
My colleague knows that. He
Okay.
can quantify that for you.
All right, so I'll hold that. And can you expand a little bit more, no, we sort of touched on this in the initial good cause hearing, but what would happen if you didn't meet all of the orders of CERTA? Perhaps you curtailed or reduced the number of times you accepted orders. What would be the effect?
I'm speculating based on the conversation I had with my colleague, and he can answer that more completely if I cannot. I would speculate that the problem with that would be loss of customer trust with them, especially, and it could cause them to have to, well, might cause them to have to turn down orders that basically it would be a ripple effect, right? If we can't fulfill their orders, they can't fulfill their customers' orders and so on. Economically, I'm not sure what that equates to in terms of dollars.
Do you know how much, for example, if you got an order, a usual order today? Oh, okay, somebody else was gonna answer that. I had another question in my head and I've lost it. We're looking, I know that not all of these interim variance conditions are necessarily going to make it into the interim variance term, which would end if it's granted by August 22nd. First question is, condition number 2, just by its very terms, can't fit within. It requires a source test protocol by August 24th. I'm wondering if it's possible to have that protocol by the 22nd as opposed to the 24th. Just a question.
I don't see why not.
I also see that in the conditions that are proposed, that there's a condition for putting in the application and expedited permitting, and then 15 days from either the issuance of the permit or the parts necessary, or I guess getting those parts necessary to replace the burners or modify. But I don't see any requirement of timely ordering. What does ordering actually, do you have to first have the permit to order? What trigger? What can we base that off of?
No, what would be the most timely part of that would be getting approval to do so. The way Carpenter Company operates, any purchase that is over $5,000 cannot be approved by the division manager, in other words, the highest ranking official at the site. What is required is a major expenditure request, and that's a formal process that goes through various levels of approval, beginning with the division manager up to the vice president, up to the executive vice president, and all the way up to the owner of the company. Now, that can be expedited if they understand what's going on. That process can be completed within 2-3 days, maybe even at the most. If it was like highly critical, they could probably push it through in a day as long as everyone was on the same page and they knew, what was required. So that's the biggest hindrance with regard to the ordering process, is that maybe it's not high enough on someone else, or prioritized highly enough on someone else's schedule to give it attention and make sure you get the approvals. Once we have the approval, we can just place the order, as long as we have a vendor that is an approved vendor in our purchasing system that will accept a purchase order.
So if I were to say by July 27th, which is the date by which you would file an application to do one or the other, that the order be placed, is that reasonable?
I don't know. I don't know, because I don't know what's going to be recommended. If we can't, see, what we have to do first is get the technician out to determine whether or not we can reconfigure the current configuration, right? Whether we can remove 2 burners. And then it would be, okay, that's not going to work. Here's what I'm recommending, okay? Whether they'll want to look at options, I would say yes. I mean, if that's a condition that's imposed, I would say we will comply.
Well, and isn't that the same information you need in order to file an application?
Yes.
Okay, so then let's do that, as long as you're agreeing. Okay. Those are my questions for now. I know I lost one, but perhaps I'll remember it. Anyone else have questions for this witness? See? Go ahead.
It's for the other witness, actually.
Oh, okay, then why don't we wait? And I think no one else has questions, so we can, oh, okay, Senator. And then we'll reintroduce the other witness.
What is your confidence level that modifying the configuration will be successful?
I don't have one. I have no prior experience with this, and speculation was not made in that conversation yesterday with the burner representative that it would or would not be successful. It's just a possible alternative.
What would cause you then to take the route for correction by modifying the burners rather than buying new ones?
The certainty that it would be successful. If it was speculating on modifying just to see if that's going to work, that would not give us confidence level enough to go with that option.
And you already stated you have no certainty because they haven't.
I can't gauge my level, so I mean, I don't know what to expect.
But you've been told, or have you been told, that buying new burners would be, you could probably be in compliance.
Yes,
You also talked about in your petition that it costs something like around $90,000. I don't have it in front of me, or maybe 900,000, something like that. Is it 90,000?
yes, under 100,000.
Under 100,000. If you were required to go and buy new burners under $100,000, would you do that?
If we're required to, yes, absolutely, yes.
And would the requirement be dictated by the fact that one is a certain success and one is a maybe success, that is modification, maybe a success, but new burners, in fact, have a higher likelihood of being success? What would influence you to take which route?
The cost. The cost. If we knew that both would be successful, if we had a guarantee, an engineering, guarantee that yes, either would be successful, I would assume we would exercise the least costly option.
When will you know, have an idea, when the modification would be successful?
We expect to know that within 7 to 10 days from now.
So in 10 days from now, it may not be successful, is that correct?
Correct.
And then you lost 10 days. Then you would go and perform, then you go buy the new parts, the new
Correct.
equipment.
Correct. That would be our only option.
And that would be in keeping with interim variance because you're buying in a specific amount of time.
Correct.
And all these other things would follow, like 15 days for permit construction. And the 30 days, no later than 30 days, the new burners are installed. How long would it take to install the new burners?
I do not know. This has all happened so fast, we're just trying to do what we're supposed to do to be in compliance, to work with the hearing board to make sure we get into compliance as quickly as possible.
So condition number 5 says petition shall provide written notice of the source test to the district. So we're testing new or old, we don't know. At least 10 days prior to the testing. Well, there's a requirement that must be met
That's for
in a
source
certain
test.
time frame.
That's for an observer to be present when the testing is done to determine compliance.
But if you had the modified version that you're going to test and decide it's not working, you lost 30 days, 15 days, you lost a lot of days,
I don't understand.
according to the specs.
Well, Senator, I believe that the conditions are written so that whichever decision is made, whether to modify the existing or to replace them, these conditions will apply. It just depends upon the initial decision as to which application, which modification they'll apply for.
So in that case, it's not much a default if you take the modification route, then all these other days come and go. That it's still.
We still have to comply with every condition in this list, regardless of which option we choose to exercise.
Therefore, in the conditions should say, Madam Chair, that we should be specific take the modified route and run it to the full extent to whether it fails or not fail. After its failure, if it is not successful, then buy the new ones.
I believe that what the conditions are saying, and the witness can correct me if I'm wrong, but what she's saying is, she's testifying that within 7 to 10 days from now, they will have that evaluation, and they will know whether they wish to pursue modification or to buy new ones. Then all of these will apply. So whichever they've chosen by July 27th, 2018, they're going to order the parts and file an application to modify their permit within 15 days. Once they get the permit, they're going to complete the replacement or modification. No more than 30 days after that, they're going to source test.
So by the 15th, you would know. By July 27th,
Yes.
you should know whether or not the modification is going to.
We will be submitting a permit application to do one or the other.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions for this witness? Dr. Lerner, did you?
This may be an unanswerable question, like many of my questions. I've always been concerned, we've had other situations where things have been replaced and they don't fit. So if you choose to replace the burners, you will know for sure that the other burners can be taken out and these can be installed. That
Yes.
There will be, replacing a 15-year-old burner, things change. May have gotten bigger, may have gotten smaller, I don't know. But you will know that for sure. You will be certain.
We know that now. We know of a burner that will drop right into the existing configuration. It's called I can't remember what they call it, but it's a 0.8, million BTU burner. It will fit exactly into the spot that the current burners are in now.
Thank you.
Okay, any other for this witness? And then we'll go to Mr. Hauersile, because I know there were some questions that he needs to answer. Okay. Mr. Hauersile, I should have asked Mr. Salzberg, but you're still under oath, you understand?
Yes.
Okay. I think, Ms. Reichart, you first had some questions that we needed to defer to this witness.
Thank you. And so my initial question had been about how frequently you'd be operating, and I think that we had a tentative answer, but if you could confirm basically how frequently and for how long you anticipate running the oven during the variance period, or at least up until the 22nd, August 22nd.
Yeah, it's between 2 and 3 days a week, and for each day that we run it, it's around 7 or 8 hours.
7 to 8 hours, okay. And what do you anticipate would be the monetary loss for this period between today and August 22nd if you were unable to actually run?
I would estimate between $100,000 and $150,000. So.
Okay, and that's based on the just purely the loss of the business from CERTA, no long-lasting impacts of what that may do to your business relationship. That's just being unable to fulfill those orders.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then can you give any sort of estimate, either qualitatively or quantitatively, of what the impact might be of your business relationship with CERTA? Is it right, CERTA? Okay, with CERTA. We're all thrown off now between what manufacturer this is. If you were unable to meet those order requirements for the next 6 weeks?
Not really on a monetary level, no. A lot of those things are more on the priceless level where you lose some of the trust and things like that that you've gained over the years between a customer and a supplier. So.
Do you work at all with kind of working with that?
Not really on the sales end.
On the sales end, so you can't, okay. And do you have any additional information regarding, you don't have any additional information regarding the excess emissions, correct? The calculations and why this said, no, okay. All right, I believe that I can have our witness testify as to what we think an excess emission calculation would be for the variance period. that time comes. That's all the questions I have for this witness. Thank you.
That will be very helpful at the time. Ms. Byrd, were you indicating you had a question?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to follow up because, well, I'll just ask the question. The 2 to 3 days a week, 7 hours a day, how is this a reduction in what you have done in the past?
I never said anything about it being a reduction.
It's not a
I was
reduction, so.
just stating that's how much
Okay.
the line
So-
is used, so,
Okay, so that's what you plan to use,
yeah.
and that's what has been used, presently.
Yeah.
So are there any reductions that you are making at all in the process during the term of the variance, or this interim variance? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess the only thing would be that we would run only the products that can be run in that line only. We wouldn't run anything in addition to it.
So is that to say that that's what you have been doing, only running the ones that have to be run on that line?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, if we need to run something on that line, we do, so.
Okay, I guess maybe I'm not clear, because one of the findings is that you would reduce to the extent feasible emissions, and so we kind of look at what else you could do during the term of the variance to maybe have fewer emissions than you might have normally had even, or what you might do. If there is, I'm not saying there is, I'm just asking if there is.
Well, for the most part, we're just-in-time supplier, so when we get an order, we supply what the customer needs, so there's, when you say what's feasible to do less than that, when you're supplying only what the customer needs already, then there's not a lot of wiggle room there, so.
Okay. I'm just, if not, it's not, I'm just asking. All right, thank you.
I had a question. I don't know if you could answer this. My question before was, do you know if there are more emissions, greater emissions on startup of the equipment than there are when it's running?
I don't have any quantitative numbers, but like with anything, when you're first starting up and heating up, you're probably going to have a little more emissions just because the burners are coming up to temperature and things like that. So.
And is there anything else that, startup time, not just starting up the equipment, but when you're going to do this 2 to 3 day order, is the equipment running when it doesn't need to be, or inefficiently because you're just starting up the order? Whereas what I'm trying to get at is, could you reduce excess emissions by doing batches? So instead of being just in time for the next month, maybe starting up on the next order and doing 2 orders worth, would that save emissions? Do you know? Either because it's more efficient or fewer emissions.
Probably the only way to do like 2 orders back to back would be run it like round the clock. We're not really staffed to run it round the clock.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and then we'd have to run it more than that, 7 hours a day.
Okay. Again, Mr. Balagopalan.
Do you know if there's on the oven, if there's a dedicated fuel meter for the oven to measure the gas flow rate?
I'm not sure whether there is or not, so.
Okay, so there's, okay. Do you have already pre-orders for the CERTA?
Yeah, we have 2 orders
That are
right
pending.
now, so 2 pending orders, yeah.
So as part of the plan to reduce emission, are you willing to take a condition to just run only CERTA during the period of the variance?
Yes, I would say we are.
Okay, because the other lines is compliant, so
Yeah.
the only thing this line can only handle, will only do the CERTA and others.
Yes, we'd be willing to
So
agree
that
to
will
that.
be one way for you to reduce your emissions, to only run the CERTA as needed
Yeah.
during the period of the variance. Okay.
Any other questions?
No.
Anyone else have questions for this witness? Senator. And then Ms. Byrd.
what is your confidence level on the modification of the configuration?
I haven't really been involved with that part of it that much, but definitely seems like if you were able to run with one less burner, you'd probably have less emissions, so I could see where we would have some confidence level there as to if we can modify it and only have 3 burners versus 4, that there should be some confidence that would pass. But I don't have, as far as the technical side of it, I haven't
On what
involved
basis,
in that at all, so.
on what basis will it be determined after condition number 1 that the modification route is a route to take?
I guess that's where we'll have to utilize the experience of the companies that we're working with to help us determine the best route to take, so.
Does there exist a protocol approved, source testing approved yet? Do you have a protocol testing? You have a protocol to testing the equipment in place?
As far as doing like the source testing, you mean, or?
Yeah, for source testing.
Well, I think we'll just follow these steps, and after we determine what step to take, then we would have to do the.
It said in condition 2, petitioner shall submit a source test protocol. Do you have anything like that currently exists?
Yeah, the source tester would do that.
So you have to depend on a third person, I guess, to give the assurance that you're in compliance. Is that correct?
Well, the source tester that we would hire, the consultant that we would hire to conduct the source testing is a certified source tester. He develops the test protocol based on data that he obtains from us. He submits it to the SCAQMD on our behalf, and it is approved by the SCAQMD, and he gets the approval to actually conduct the source test.
Was there a source control test, protocol test available on June the 9th, the test, when you test?
Yes.
There
Yes.
was?
Yes.
Did you
There has to be.
Was that shared with you?
No. No, it was not. It was submitted to the SCAQMD on behalf of our company by the consultant.
So AQMD had a copy of that protocol
Yes.
source test?
Yes.
All right, I think you testified that sometime early, July 27th, you will know which route you're going to take. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that'll be based on what?
Based on input from the combustion experts and the burner experts as to which is going to be best for us to do.
Is there any penalty with the experts if they fail to then therefore subsequently meet the other requirements in the time frame, 15 days, 30 days, et cetera?
I'm sorry, could you restate that? So I didn't quite understand.
If and when the experts tell you, go with the modified version,
Okay.
and then they commence to perform these other tests as specified in these conditions, and then you get downstream, and it's not as they say it would be, is there any accountability there?
Not that I'm aware of. However, we would not exercise the option to modify the existing configuration on the hope that we would be compliant when the work was finished. If we did not have an absolute guarantee of that, we would not exercise that option. We would go with a full replacement of the burners. There are only 2 options here. It's modify what we have or replace what we have.
Well, sometimes vendors will give you a guarantee. In the event that the guarantee is not met, is any action to be taken?
We do have that option that was discussed yesterday. Actually, you can go through a process with the burner manufacturer where they will guarantee you that it will operate the way that they have said that it will. That there's I can't remember the term for it now, but the process is you obtain, it's an official form from the manufacturer. You complete all of the requested information. They take that information back. They have that analyzed and evaluated by their design engineers, and they come back and they provide you with a written guarantee that those burners that they're saying are gonna perform the way you need them to will in fact do that. And if they do not, they will provide whatever service is necessary or replacement of the burners themselves to be in compliance. They will guarantee that they will get you into compliance.
If they do not, there's a likelihood, or is there a likelihood, or are you aware of it, that you come back to the district and ask for modification?
Another modification, you mean, or you mean?
Do you understand whether or not a modification request would be required if they failed to meet the conditions as specified, as guaranteed, say, for an example?
I mean, do I expect to have to do another permit modification, asking for something else?
Yeah, more time, new permit changes?
Well, if they were warranted, sure, but I don't foresee that happening, because based on whatever decision we make, we are going to submit a permit application with a specific goal in mind. So if we're going to modify, we're going to ask, okay, for just, it might even be an administrative change to the permit, I don't know. Asking for the language of the equipment description to be changed, like for instance, going from 4 burners to 2 burners, right? The other option would be a full-on permit modification where we're changing the equipment and say we're removing this and we're adding this, and these are the serial numbers, these are the capacities, et cetera. Either way, it's going to require a permit modification, but we are going to know within 10 days or so exactly which option we're going to take. And we're going to have to stick with that option and, submit the permit application for a modification based upon that decision.
So they would give you the assurance that go with the modification, and that if they do, that it's certainly going to work and we won't see you again, right?
Well, that is definitely the hope, yes.
Ms. Byrd?
I just wanted to follow up with Mr. Howard-Zill, just so that we don't have to open the hearing again when we close it. You mentioned that you would accept a condition of using line 2 for CERTA only. I just wanted to make sure that you understand that would mean that if line 1 failed, you would not be able to use line 2 for anything else. Is that what you're stating, or?
Yeah, I understand that.
So if line 1 fails, you won't be able to use line 2 for anything except CERTA?
Yes, I understand that.
Okay. And you're willing to do that until the 22nd, to have that condition? 22nd of August. I'm not saying that you have to. I'm just wanting to make sure that we're on the same page. That's what I heard, and I just wanted to make sure.
Well, that's what we can do. I mean, if that's what you want and require us to do, then you just need to let us know that, so.
Okay. Okay, we'll discuss that later.
I just had a clarification.
And Mr. Balago-Pillot?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Just to clarify, yes, the modification you're talking about, it's one of two things, or taking 2 burners out, and going with a lower BTU rating with 2, or replacing all 4 with lower rating BTUs?
It would be either. We don't know if it would be removing 1 or 2 burners, as stated earlier in earlier testimony. The other fiber line has 3 burners that are exactly the same, and we passed the NOx emission compliance source test. So we would. It hasn't been determined yet whether it would be removing 1 or 2. It could be 2. Okay, it could be 1, removing some of it. The other option would be, but not changing BTU value. We would leave the existing BTU value of the remaining burners.
Right.
Or it would be downsizing and replacing all 4 burners with burners that are about half the capacity of what we have now, going from a 1.6 million BTU rating per burner to a 0.8 million BTU burner, replacing all 4.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Lerner?
I'm not really certain of how you answered Ms. Byrd's question. my understanding currently, or before this all happened, you could use, if number one shut down, you could use number two, but you can't use number two at the same time you're using it for the CERTA thing. Is that correct?
We can run both lines at the same time, was it?
But if one shut down, if number one was shut down, you could switch to number two, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So-
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm a little confused what you said about whether you would, if number one would shut down, let's say it broke down, you would be able to use number two. Is that your testimony currently? As of today, let's say number one shut down, broke down, you could use number two. Is that
Yeah, if we
correct?
receive a variance to allow us to do that, we're not running line two at all right now,
No,
but yeah, in the past, in our history,
yeah,
that's what we do, is if, line two is kind of if we run the Protec on there, when operating as usual and both lines are running, we run the Protec only, the fire retardant material.
okay.
If line one breaks down, then we switch it over and start using it for all products, so.
Gotcha, okay. And the purpose of this variance is it your understanding that the purpose of this variance will allow you to do that with the second line, is that correct? You'll be able to work both kinds of orders. They can't be run obviously concurrently, but they can be run separately. In the event that something happened to the aging number one burner. Is that correct? Maybe I'm not making myself clear. If I'm not, please help me.
At this point yet, I haven't really received clear, we were asked what we can do to minimize, that's what we could do to minimize, is only run that material on that line, but I haven't received like clear direction saying only do that, but that would be what we would prefer to be able to do. And if we weren't running line one, obviously we wouldn't have any emissions being emitted on line one at that time, so we would still have a reduced amount of emissions, so.
My other question was, when you get an order from CERTA, how many days of work do you usually get on average? I imagine the orders sort of vary, but on average, how many days do you get for them to
Well,
work?
they order a truckload at a time, and it takes approximately a day and a half maybe to make that one order, so.
Gotcha.
And that's if, you know,
And then you go back and you can use line two for other things, non-CERTA.
normally we use it only for the Protec product.
Okay, so then line two is shut down.
Yep,
Okay,
we run it
Right.
maybe 2 days a week on average, and other than that, it's shut down, yeah.
okay. You mentioned 7 hours, 2 to 3 days a week, so the max that we're talking about is 21 hours a week. That's what you've,
Yeah, on average, throughout over the last 3 years, approximately, that's how much it's run, yeah. So.
I just want to just get a round number. 21 is a round number, and for me, and so that's helpful. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions before we move on to the district witness who's going to help us with excess emissions? Okay, seeing none. Ms. Reichart, you're on.
Thank you. The district calls back Mr. Namaki?
Correct.
Why I can't? I'm so concerned to make sure I get it right. Could you describe, I understand you did some calculations for what you anticipate the excess emissions to be. Would you mind just basically walking through the method, how you did that and what you based it on for the board?
Sure. I based it on, I took two things in consideration. One, the rule requirement, which is 30 ppm, and another, what they tested at, which was 45 ppm. and the capacity of their oven, which it has 4 burners, 1.6 million BTU per hour each, which totals to 6.4 million BTU per hour. So if we assume 30 ppm NOx, or if we assume 40 ppm NOx, we end up with 2 different emission rates. So the the difference of those 2 emission rates is actually the emission increase, which is equivalent to 0.1152 pounds per hour. That's what I got when
Can you repeat that number? I'm sorry.
0.1152 pounds per hour. This will be the emission increase.
And so if we assume, well, I guess they said 7 to 8 hours. So if we just assume 8 hours per day on the days that they are using that oven, that would be 0.92 pounds per day. Is that correct?
If I use 16 hours because that's the way equipment was scheduled, basically you can multiply pounds per hour times hours they operated, and you can get the emissions.
Okay.
Emission increases. Like
So
if
we
they-
can leave it at that as 0.1152 pounds per hour, and then whatever the board determines would be the appropriate hours per day. And I believe that's the only question I have, so if the board has any other questions for the engineer.
Let me just ask Ms. Stolzenberg if you happen to have any questions for the engineer on this.
No, that makes good sense to me.
Okay. Mr. Balagopalan.
Yes. Mr. Namaki, would you say, I mean, that's the maximum because you're using the maximum rating of all 4 burners.
Correct.
Would you say a more representative emission would be knowing the fuel usage daily?
I do calculate that fuel usage also, but it will only work if they have a fuel meter.
Right.
I have that calculation. If the equipment has a fuel meter, actually that would be a better way to determine the emissions.
Correct, yeah. So that would be more representative with the fuel meter.
Correct.
Because the testimony was that they don't use the full capacity of the,
Correct.
so, okay.
The one that I just mentioned to you, 0.1152 pounds per hour, it's a very conservative
Right,
emissions.
using the maximum rating of all 4
Correct.
burners, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for this witness? Senator?
Condition number 6, it says that no later than 30 days after the source test is conducted, petitioner shall submit to complete copies of the source test report to you, sir. The source test report shall include, but not limited to, all testing data required. Required to issue permit to construction. So therefore, in this particular case, with these conditions, the permit you anticipate will require certain testing, is that correct? Based on number 6?
Correct. Once we issue the permit to construct, we include source test condition and asking them what to test for.
But you testified earlier on that there was no requirement in the permit at that particular time for source testing.
Right, that was a previous permit that was issued in 2003, I believe.
Right, but
This will be a new permit, therefore I will include that.
you
the
will include that.
Correct.
Very, very good.
Well, we always include source test condition for when we issue a permit. However, not all the equipment will require source test condition, but many do. So it's a normal practice, it's nothing new.
So early on, based on the discussion, the permit didn't require because it was not requested, is that correct?
Correct, it was not requested of them to source test.
What's the policy now, if you can tell us, for source testing?
What is the policy?
Yeah.
It's determination with emission requirement to comply with best available control technology. We have a guideline which specifies best available control equipment. Sometimes there are limits specified on that, what limit of emission you should comply with. And sometimes those limit comes from rule. In this case, actually, the limit comes from 2 sources. One is BACT and also as well as 1147. So because the rule states that you have to meet 30 ppm NOx, we will include a condition for them to show compliance with 30 ppm NOx.
After the modification? After the modification?
Or right, after they put a new burner in, or they modify the burners.
Okay, that being the case, then my following question, would you require at specific time for additional testing beyond the acceptance test?
Additional time for additional tests, is that what you're asking
Yes,
me?
yeah, and a time frame for additional testing to make sure that you're in compliance 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now. Would that be included in the permit?
Not unless the rule requires us to do that. Let's say Rule 1146, I think that was cited here before, that requires periodic testing. Rule 1110.2 also requires periodic testing, but there is no such a thing in 1147, and there are no such requirement for BACT to test this equipment frequently.
Okay, what is your attitude or the likelihood of you having compliance with 1147 and 1146? You're
I'm
the
sorry,
engineer.
what is,
You make the requirements for what should go in the permit. You're going to require that they have 1147. You're going to require periodic testing. You're going to require the acceptance of the protocol. You would do that, you were saying,
correct.
in the permit. Would you also require 1146, which is periodic testing? And if not, why not?
Well, 1146 does not apply to this equipment. 1146 is for specific equipment for boilers and heaters,
Okay,
not for ovens.
thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
Anyone else have questions for Mr. Namaki? Ms. Reichert, any other witnesses you wish to?
I believe the board had a concern about one of the conditions about reporting. Did you want to hear from one of the district inspectors about why we were requiring that? No. Okay.
My point is,
Do you want to turn on your microphone? Go ahead.
my point is, it's, if you're taking a set point and a set, it's the data, the two numbers, basically hours of operation doesn't change. A more representative data would be with having a fuel meter.
Which,
And
which I don't know
would
that we.
give a better, and I was going to see about, and I'm not sure if it's feasible, if they can install a fuel meter dedicated to that oven so that they can record the fuel usage, so it's a more accurate data, emission data during that period of the variance, if it's granted. So I was going to see if that, I'm not sure logistically or, if there's space and all that, to do that for the equipment.
I don't know about that. I would be reluctant to agree to that without knowing what we're even looking at, if it's possible to do, how long, what time frame. That's a gas company thing, that's not a government agency, it's a private agency. I don't even know, we have not asked that question. We could ask that question.
Perhaps that's something they could look at in advance of the regular variance hearing?
Yeah, that would.
Okay.
Just the feasibility of installing a fuel meter dedicated to the oven to record the fuel usage.
Okay, in that case, then the district has no further witnesses.
Wonderful. Okay, this is not a publicly noticed hearing, so at this time I won't ask because I know that there are no members of the public who were made aware of this hearing. And so I'm going to just ask Ms. Stolzenberg if you have any concluding statement or comments you'd like to make.
Only that Carpenter Company, we really did act in as timely manner as we could to address this issue. Once we became aware of it, our intent is always to be 100% compliant, to go above and beyond compliance when we believe that it's the right thing to do. So it's unfortunate that we find ourselves in this situation now, and just ask that the board please give us just consideration when making your decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Reichert, your closing.
Thank you. Subject to compliance with the proposed conditions, the district is not opposed to the granting of this variance, and the district would not be opposed. I know that there was discussion about perhaps adding a condition regarding placing an order for parts or replacement units by July 27th, changing the date number 2 to the 22nd. We do not object to either of those changes.
And adding a condition with regard to not processing any products on line 2 other than the, what is it called? I know CERTA, but I wrote down what you said the material was called. Protec. Thank you.
And the district is not opposed to that condition as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, board members, I'm happy to start the discussion with regard to the findings for the interim variance. I believe that they can be made, and I find this a bit easier of a decision than the initial decision with regard to the good cause to hold the hearing in the first place. Petitioner is in violation right now of Rule 1147, and particular of the compliance date of July 1st. They were required to be in compliance with the 30 ppm for their burners in line 2, and they are not. I believe it's beyond their reasonable control. It's due to conditions beyond their reasonable control. I think it was, I do repeat that I do believe it was reasonable based on their prior experience with a line using the same burners that passed 4 years ago, that were also rated by the manufacturer to meet 25 ppm, that these burners would meet 30 ppm. And I'm sure they wish they had tested it earlier, and I know we wish they would have tested it earlier as well. But in any event, they did not pass, and they would not have passed. And we're here, and this is the timing that we're here on. I also believe, with regard to beyond reasonable control, that I continue to believe this petitioner is good and quick in acting. I think we heard some testimony with regard to testing wasn't possible, so they went to a different tester to try to get them there on a Saturday and pay more money for overtime. They did that twice. They really were working very diligently to try to come into compliance and try to make sure this gets done, and they, in a timely manner, I think they're agreeing to conditions that would make it happen in a timely manner, and I believe they're serious about it. They already have identified a replacement burner should they need to. So I do believe that they acted reasonably, and it's beyond their reasonable control that they're in the situation that they're in. And I think requiring compliance, meaning to shut down line 2, would lead to an unreasonable taking of property. And that would be in the amount of approximately $100,000 to $150,000 for the time between now and when a hearing could be held on a regular variance, and also really kind of incalculable damage to what is obviously a relationship they've built over time with a major supplier, or customer, I should say. I believe that closing or taking would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. I think that's a hefty price to pay for what would be, according to the district, less than probably a pound a day of NOx based on the 8 hours it generally takes. 7-8 hours, that's 8 hours, that's more conservative, and it's only several times during the month. So we can calculate that, but I do believe that that doesn't outweigh, or it's not a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. They've given consideration to curtailing operations in lieu of obtaining a variance, and the only way they could do that is to completely shut down line 2, because the CERTA Polytech material cannot be done on line number 1. That's why line number 2 was created. And if they were to just simply not run it and not produce that material, we've already talked about what the impacts would be. And they have, during this hearing, given consideration to reducing excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible. The line itself cannot be, the NOx cannot be reduced anymore. They're just-in-time supplier, so what they get from CERTA is what they will produce, and that's always the way they've done it, but they've also agreed to a proposed condition, which I would propose in a motion, not to process anything else during the time between now and August 22nd on line 2, even if line 1 does break down. And while it's true that line 1 wouldn't be operating, line 1 is compliant, line 2 is not. So it is some savings of emissions. And they will be monitored in terms of hourly usage and the throughput that is processed through the equipment. And I think that's all I have to say on the findings. Anyone else wish to add to that? Ms. Burt?
I just wanted to say that while I may have found that I didn't agree that we should hold the hearing in absence of notice to the public, because my feeling was they knew June 9th that they had seriously failed and they could have submitted a petition possibly before July 3rd without going through all of what they went through, because we don't always require that you have to come in after proceeding with different tests and research and all that to come before us. And so that my feeling was that it could have happened, a petition could have been filed before July 3rd, but I say all that to say that I believe that I can make the findings as were just mentioned, and that line 2, the fact that line 2 is only the only line that will be operating, which is pretty drastic of an approach. I have to accept that that's a good measure to reduce what emissions might be reduced to the maximum extent feasible. So I'm comfortable with that, and I think we could probably make the make the findings.
Anyone else? Mr. Balagopalan?
I was going to add on that condition that where they run only the CERTA line during the period of variance, that they do not stock up just as per the order received, and not run additional product and stock up, because then you just as needed inventory, so you're not stocking up an inventory for.
So
in order.
let me, wait, don't, because we are closed, but if I could, this is what let me read to you and then tell me if this addresses that. What I was going to propose when I make a motion is petitioner shall not process any products on line 2 other than the Protec material as ordered by CERTA.
Right.
Would that take care of it?
Yeah.
Or would you like me to add to that, or?
No, I think as ordered,
As
that will
ordered.
take care of that. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have any other discussion?
One other, I think, is look, if they could, maybe as condition is look into the feasibility of adding a dedicated fuel meter to the oven to record the actual gas usage. Because I calculated based on what Mr. Namaki pointed out, based on the worst case, it's about less than a pound per day at the maximum rating of the 4 burners, so it'll be a fraction thereof. They're probably operating 40-60% of capacity, so the excess emission is probably less than half a pound a day. But I think having the fuel meter is a more accurate representation of the emission that will fulfill condition number 7 to no daily emission, if that's what the inspectors wanted.
Okay, I will try to write something up, and then when I propose a motion, tell me if it makes sense. Did you have any other thoughts on the findings? No. On the findings. Anyone else have thoughts on the findings? Any more discussion on the findings? Senator?
I mentioned the word negligence early on. I neglected to be assured that testing could be performed. On the configuration of the structure of the facility and the operations that was taking place inside of the facility, manufacturing, and the testing equipment were interfered with because of the size of the equipment and the opening of the structure to permit the equipment to go in to perform the test. So what I'm concerned about is that you knew it had to be performed, and nobody took the time to learn whether or not the equipment could be used in that facility at the time to perform the test, because it was interference in the structure. So I'm going to look by that at this point in time, give you a pass, but some of these should have been done based on my knowledge and experience in the field. That's what you always look for, is interference.
Okay,
Okay. Now,
understood.
for the new permit, hopefully that'll be issued, applied for and granted. It'll be with the full knowledge of this engineer, Husan Kamaki. And I'm convinced that you'll be hands-on to require that all the conditions of the permit are met, because you're going to write the condition in the permit for testing and acceptance tests. And that's good for the district, because our goal here is to clean the area up. We've got to have the requirements in place to make sure that the respondents are doing that. Trust your judgment, and therefore, you being on the job, hands-on, will give me an aye vote on the request. And the district should be proud of you.
Thank you.
Always nice to recognize good work by the district. Anyone else have any discussion on the findings? Okay, then I'm going to make a motion. In the matter of Carpenter Company, case number 5356-2, I move that we grant an interim variance, which would begin today and would end in 90 days or until a hearing for regular variance can be heard, which is currently scheduled for August 22nd, 2018. And I'm just, for the explanation of the petitioner, we expect it will end on August 22nd. In any event, and it is for the facility that is located at 7809 Lincoln Avenue, Riverside, 92504. It is for the thermobonding oven of the 4 low NOx burners that are listed on page 2, item number 6 of the petition, and it is from the 30 ppm NOx limit that is established in Rule 1147C1. I further move that we include the proposed interim variance conditions on Exhibit A with the following changes. In condition number 1, we would add after, at the very end, before the period, where it says Rule 301V, first we would take out the word "and" between, in the second line, in the curing oven and request, the wrong "and." Oven and request and pay for. So take out that "and" before request, and so there would be a comma. So it would file the application, blah, 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 comma, request and pay for expedited permit processing pursuant to Rule 301V, and order all parts and equipment necessary. So that's, and order all parts and equipment necessary to replace the burners or modify the existing burners. That's at the very end, so that's before the period now, after Rule 301V, it would say, and order all parts and equipment necessary to replace the burners or modify the existing burners.
Which condition is it? Number 1.
That's condition number 1. And that change would be so that we are now including in the date July 27th not only filing of application and the paying for expedited permitting fees, but also to order all necessary parts and equipment. In 2, just to make it cleaner, we're going to change August 24th to August 22nd. We're going to add a new condition, let's see. Let's call it number 7. And then we'll renumber after that. 7 shall now be, it's an additional condition. Petitioner shall not process any products on line 2 other than the Protec material as ordered by CERTA. I'm going to do something not really within the rules, but Protec is Protech. Yes, I've got it. That's correct. Okay. So that'll be condition number 7. And condition, okay, so then.
Just as a clarification.
Yes.
The company that's ordering, I know it's a brand name for the mattress, but I wonder if that's also.
It is. I'm getting yes, it is? Okay, it is. Thank you for that clarification. And I'm trying to figure out where this last one will go. How about, okay, so 8 would, existing 7 will now be 8. Existing 8 will now be 9. 9 will now be 10. And then new condition 11 will be petitioner shall, in advance of the regular variance hearing, investigate the possibility of adding a fuel meter to line 2. So that would read, petitioner shall, in advance of the regular variance hearing, investigate the possibility of adding a fuel meter to line 2. Is that engineeringly correct? Temporary. Okay. Okay. We can say temporary or permanent. Okay, so I will then change that to read, investigate the possibility of adding a temporary or permanent fuel meter to line 2. And then what is existing 10 would then be renumbered and 11 would be renumbered. We also need a date for, and generally that's 15 days after today. June 26th? No, today is July 26th, thank you. So we will add in the space in what was condition 11, July 26, 2018. Excess emissions are anticipated to be 0.01152 pounds per hour of NOx, which is also estimated to be approximately 0.92 pounds per day based on 8 hours of operation. And that's only when line 2 is in operation. And that completes my motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the motion? Senator.
You put in there a meter to measure the fuel.
It is just,
Measuring meter.
not to measure it, but to, yeah, to.
That's what it does.
Right. Yes, that's just to investigate the possibility.
Investigate the possibility of determining whether or not you're going to install a fuel meter online.
That's correct, because Mr. Balagopalan wanted to include that condition because it is his feeling that you can more accurately estimate or measure excess emissions by fuel use. And so the petitioner does not know today, as they sit here, whether or not they can physically place a fuel meter on line 2.
Just put it online. Physically, yeah. With that configuration, then I can visualize it can be done. But that's not the point. The point is, how would that affect your output? Because you have a meter in place.
It won't affect the, in fact, it'll give a more accurate representation of the emission. The inspectors, is in condition number 7, I think it's now changed, they wanted to get daily NOx emission record. So having a fuel meter will give a more accurate representation of the daily emissions.
It is mentioned here, it was speculating before, and the good cause, item number 4. And I raised that issue about the test the consultant performed. The test speculated that the burners had likely failed the test due to a rich fuel condition caused by inadequate airflow. How you improve the airflow? That's what he's the engineer, let me ask him.
You can answer that, but I'm not sure is that relevant to the motion that's on the table?
It's probably more relevant than putting a meter in to measure the amount of fuel that's going in.
So do you not agree with the addition of the proposed condition in the motion, which would be to investigate the potential of putting a fuel meter in by the regular variance hearing, to know whether by the regular variance hearing that's a possibility?
My question is, would that improve the airflow?
It won't affect the airflow, but my understanding is they had Heat Tech, the company that came out there, investigate of looking at that and see if there's any problem with getting additional airflow, and I think they've looked at it.
Say it again, I'm sorry, sir.
I think they had hired a company called Heat Tech in their testimony
Yeah.
that looked into that situation of, see if there's a problem with the airflow, and I don't think they come to a conclusion one way or the other what the problem, is. So, and the only reason I wanted the proposed condition was it'll more accurately quantify the emissions. It's still below, it's going to be, we know Mr. Navaki calculated based on the highest rating, so it's below, if 8 hours, it's below a pound a day. So this will be a fraction thereof.
Since the fuel flow is an issue now, we made it. What about the richness, the fuel richness?
No, I think that goes inherent in the burner design, how it's designed to pull in adequate amount of air and the mixing of the air and the natural gas. But I think part of the other thing, the gas fuel meter will also help, when they want to say they want to go down to 0.8 million BTU for each burner, that's a reduction in gas consumption. This will also give an indicator that, how much they consuming during a regular operation, of whether that going down to 0.8 million BTU for each burner will be adequate. So
this is all natural gas, right?
Natural gas, only on the natural gas, yeah.
All right.
Any other discussion or questions on the motion? Okay, seeing none. Ms. Byrd, how do you vote?
Yes.
Dr. Lerner, how do you vote?
Yes.
Senator, how do you vote?
Aye.
I vote, how do you vote, Mr. Balago?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So motion passes 5-0. I assume you understand the requirements, and we'll see you again on August 22nd.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all. Any other business, board members? Seeing none, we are adjourned.